Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Padre's Corner is provided by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Padre's Corner, episode 17, recorded December 16th, 2014, or December 23rd. The best of 2014. Welcome to Padre's Corner. I'm Father Robert Balacer, the digital Jesuit. Padre's Corner is the show where we put you into the mind of a Jesuit priest and see if you come out sane on the other side. We've got a special show for you today. It's the best of 2014. Now, I know that this is episode 17, but we've actually had more than 30 episodes, if you include all of the shows that we did before Padre's Corner became an official Twitch show. So what we're going to do is we've painstakingly gone through all of the episodes, all of the interviews, all of the product reviews to bring you the best of the best of the best. Two men who I admire, who I very much respect, and whose work I very much enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome to Padre's Corner, often guest, Mr. David Hewitt, actor, writer, director, star of Stargate, SG-1, Atlantis, and yes, the universe. He's Dr. Rodney McKay. If you're a sci-fi buff, you know exactly who that is, and you're probably squeeing right now. And Mr. Chad Johnson. Chad is the star, the host of The Gizwiz with Dick DiBartolo here on the Twit TV network. And newly independent, he is the host, producer, director, writer, guru, emperor of OMG Craft. So if you're into Minecraft, he's a source of knowledge. Gentlemen, I want to thank all of you, both of you, for coming onto Padre's Corner.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah. The reason
Any
why,
opportunity to geek out.
right? Yeah. This is what I like about Padre's Corner.
I'm so geeking out right now. I can't believe same podcast.
A little bit of squee. A little bit of squee.
Yeah, a little bit of squee.
Now, gentlemen, the reason why I ask you both to come on here is because I wanted to have a serious conversation about what it means for a content creator.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I sold you out to Dinner Bone there earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You did. You did. I know Dinnerbone is a huge fan, and so we were tweeting, and yeah, it got awesome.
I saw a little bit of that. Well, wait. I'm sorry. Back up. What was that all about?
So Dinnerbone is like one of the lead developers of Minecraft, and he's a fan. And so, of David. And so I was saying that I was going to be on, and he was tweeting also, and it was a good time all around.
Wait, David, before we go any further, you play Minecraft.
So
Yeah.
You play a lot of Minecraft, right, David?
oh God, yeah. I'm a huge Minecraft fan. My son is the one who got me into it, and probably knows far more than I do, but I just love it. So.
Oh, okay. I personally, I don't play Minecraft, so maybe I understand why Chad likes it. But David, maybe you can explain to me what it is about Minecraft that seems to capture the minds of both older people and especially younger.
Well, I think what's so wonderful about it is that it's truly a different world again. It's what's been promised us for so long, is the idea of just having this sort of sandbox where you can do whatever you want, and there's sort of almost a programming like quality to it. It's simplicity. It's very the graphics are very simple, and yet the game itself is incredibly complex, or as complex as you want it to be. So you can literally get into programming redstone and as well as just sort of killing zombies and surviving and stuff. And also, it's just a great thing to do with your kid. It's like playing Lego without all the mess.
Right. You can, yeah, I would completely agree. Like, it's at its base, it is Legos that are virtual, so you don't have to clean them up. But then as your kids grow and as you grow with the game, you can literally become a hardware designer, designing circuits and logic and making sure you make the most compact RS Norlatch gate so that you can have that really cool stairway that you've always wanted. Like, it really, it's a game that grows with whatever level player you are, I feel like.
Yeah. David,
it's almost like the maker movement in games.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I personally haven't been getting into Minecraft just because I don't have any spare cycles, and it seems like a really addictive game. But it's something that you play, Hewitt, with what do you call your son, the Bratlet?
Yes, Bratlet. Bratlet seems to be yes, it's a term of affection that some people take. I've actually been told off a couple of times. Like I shouldn't be calling my son that, but I call it to his face as well. So he doesn't seem to mind it. He's dying to do let's plays. Actually, he keeps bugging me to do let's plays. I'm just not sure about putting him on camera at 7 years old.
No, very wise.
Probably smart.
Hewitt, we're actually having issues with your connection, so I'm going to put a bug here real quick. I'm going to drop you and reconnect you on a different line.
Do you want me to try? You want me to try moving closer to my router? See if that helps at all. Because I'm in the basement now, so that might be making a difference.
That will be making a difference, but if it's already lagged, it's going to have an issue. So yeah, if you could move closer, I'm going to drop you and reconnect you while you do that.
In the meantime, we can have kitty time.
Yeah, okay. I'll be changing my setting a little bit.
Okay.
We all we need is the girl from Ipanema and Kitty.
Towards the end there, he was like 20 seconds delayed.
Yeah, that was
I have
insane.
not seen that. That's insane. Kitties. Kitty.
I'm trying to get her to purr into the mic.
Oh, let me see if I can if my search foo is still working here. I think I remember where all this stuff is.
Rawr. Cord, cat. It's caught in her leg. Cat.
Yo, cat.
Yo, cat, this cord is choking me. Where did it go in you? What is up? Cat.
I think Kitty is just mad that she won't get a bark box.
There we go. There we go. She'll do this until my neck gets so hot that I'm just like, get off!
1 sec, I'm going to turn off my mic a bit. I have to troubleshoot
problem.
something here. Hewitt, can you say a few things? Your audio is not coming through.
Make sure that that Skype machine that you switched him to is muted.
Yeah, no, it's good. Are you muted on your end?
Maybe something got unplugged. Maybe you might want to just try unplugging and replugging the USB mic in.
Yeah. Can you go ahead and try disconnecting and reconnecting your USB headset? I'm assuming that he can hear us.
Yeah.
Let me try this again. Hewitt, can you nod your head if you can hear us? This is not good. Sorry, girl from Ipanema.
Hello?
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Hey. Perfect.
Hewitt, I need to check the lag here. When I say go, could you please hold up your hand? And go. Okay, so it's relatively short. We were getting up to like 10 to 15 seconds of lag with the last connection, and it was making it very difficult. We've lost your audio again. You came in for just a second. Let me rebalance all these shots.
Yeah, it looks like my headphones aren't working now.
Oh, now we got him. Oh, we had him.
Well, he's coming through the laptop audio.
Oh, got it. I see. Yeah, sometimes with those USB things, the USB drivers will crash, and just a quick unplug and replug will reboot the whole thing.
Right.
How's that?
Yes. There we go.
But I'm hearing you on that for some reason. Hang on one second.
Now we're cooking with
There you go. Now I got
plasma.
you.
Perfect.
All right, I'm in the living room now, so hopefully that's better.
We're going to have to make some sort of transition, some sort of Asgard beam effect. We'll be engaged. So, Victor, if you're editing this, we need some sort of cool Asgard beam for Hewitt to move him to the living room.
Live from Atlantis. We've got the lag.
Okay. Okay. So the way we're going to do this is the last thing that was asked of you was how you got into Minecraft.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do, if you're game, I'd like you to basically finish the sentence or finish the end part, the second half of your answer, so that our editor can just sort of beam you over.
What did I say? It was brilliant.
It was brilliant. I remember it was brilliant. But you can end it with it was something along the lines of Minecraft reaches out to a bunch of different generations just because it's so easy to create. Okay.
So Minecraft works. What I love about Minecraft is that it works both for the parent and the kid. It crosses the generations basically, because you get into it in a very simple manner, but it becomes much more complex the more you sort of delve into it. So.
Whoa, Hewitt, did you just move to a different location in your house?
I beam around a little bit, you know.
Well, see,
the personal transporter.
Dang.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the sort of high quality content that you get from Padre's Corner.
We don't
Only
get this
here
on This Week in Tech, the show. Yeah.
Yeah. These kind of crazy
Dang.
effects.
Yeah.
They just follow me around.
Gentlemen, I want to get into this because I'm really, really pumped to have this discussion about content creation. We all do some sort of content creation, be it for podcasts or for the big screen and for TV or for YouTube. I want to talk a little bit how those worlds are colliding because Hewitt, when I spoke with you during your interview, you mentioned how excited you were because this thing called the internet is now sort of opening up a world for content creators who were used to working in the studio system. What about it? What is it?
It's so funny because I talk to YouTube people who all want to get into film and television, and then I'm meeting more and more film and television people who want to get sort of onto the YouTube side of stuff because of the control issues. And it's just, for me, it's just so exciting that you can make stuff without having this huge infrastructure. I mean, we've just finished this film Debug, which was great, amazing experience, huge, by my standards, a huge film. I'm used to making films for like $60,000. This was a much larger budget than that, and it had movie stars and all that kind of stuff. But I find the process incredibly frustrating and antiquated. I mean, there's a way that we've been making movies for so long now, and they were created, and this structure was created to work within the studio system. And the whole point of the studio system was if someone fell ill, you just bring in someone else, and they would, so that the jobs were all broken down in such a way that someone could replace anyone at any point. And the technology has become so much better now that you're able to basically do the work of 100 people with one camera and a microphone. And I feel the film and television industry is still trying to catch up with that. So I was sort of gravitated towards YouTube because I just saw people making much more exciting stuff. Like most of the stuff that I enjoy the most, the things that have touched me the most over the last couple of years have been YouTube videos. I'm not giant $200 million movies, but little personal things that people have done that have just as good special effects in some cases.
Let me ask you about that, because you spoke briefly about this creative process. In the studio system, what does the creative process look like? Because obviously it's not just you. You're working with dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of other people to get something created. How do you go from idea to we're shooting it, editing it, color correcting it, and distributing it?
It's interesting. I mean, the thing that really struck me was, I've been doing this for years and years now, since I was 16, basically. And it's always been in, sort of traditional film and television, basically. I've done a lot of independent film. I've done a lot of huge films. But the real eye-opener for me was Rise of the Planet of the Apes, where I was in there as an actor and a nerd. Like, I just had to be involved somehow. And I couldn't get over just the scale of this thing, that you had a director on set that you were working with who had pre-visualizations of basically the entire movie. They had one team off in Hawaii shooting one thing. They had another team off shooting stunt stuff, and he was doing the acting portion of it. And I sort of realized that film, there's this image of the director as this sort of mad genius or introverted sort of artist. And it's not. It's their, management is the biggest part of, the biggest skill of being able to somehow juggle all the different people who are involved in funding these things, because they're so huge that the films are made, almost by committee now. They're not generally the work of one person. And while that still happens, there's a few directors out there who you really see their personality on it. So many of them it's just a machine. Now, Rise of the Planet of the Apes was interesting because this guy was brought in from independent film specifically to work on the acting side of this stuff, like to make these characters sort of come alive. And I loved working with him. I thought he was fantastic. But his skills, it was such a different skill set than what I imagined for a big Hollywood director.
Right. And I think that's the process that a lot of us think a Hollywood film has to go through. A big budget film has to go through a lot of different hands. So of course it's going to have to go through a lot of different heads. But and you touched on this, and I want to bring Chad in this conversation. Chad, we come from a different side of content production where we don't have a big studio and we don't have 400 different people who do individual jobs. You're kind of expected, if you're making on the internet, to be able to do all jobs. Right. At least at the beginning, you have to be able to push through your idea and get it distributed as fast as possible. That's kind of the model. What do you do with OMG Craft? I mean, OMG Craft was something that was your brainchild. You developed it. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. You had many months where the view count it gets kind of depressing until finally you got enough visibility where people really started watching it. That was something that was on their radar. How does your creative process work?
Well, I think for a lot of online creators, you have to be a Renaissance man. You have to do everything. You have to be able to be your own marketer, you write your own scripts, you make your own sets, you do the construction of the set, not only design, but the construction and setting it up and lighting and miking and audio and everything. You really do have to be a Renaissance man. Just on the production aspect, you kind of have to build if you're going to do something that's higher quality, I would say you can always do something where you always just focus on your talents. And we see that a lot with YouTubers and I still do it on my personal channel, where I'm going to put out something like a vlog or like just a normal video game series or something like that. And I'll try my best. I will start making an intro in After Effects, which I've never done before, and you use the external brain, which is Google, to make sure that you can get around hurdles that are associated with, with learning new programs, and you try your best to become a tinkerer in whatever program you need. But for something like OMG Craft, I really had this vision of something that was a little bit more polished and a little bit bigger. And you need to create that same sort of team that Dave was talking about, but where if someone becomes sick, you're kind of out of luck. I have a guy that his name is Blender MF. He's my designer guy. And if Blender was for some reason to kick the bucket, knock on wood, I'd be like, all my design stuff is gone, because no more thumbnails are going to get made. None of the fancy 3D renders of Minecraft characters are going to get done, because I don't have anyone else, but I still do have a team of people that just through friendship and through grinding through this process together, I've met on the internet and in the same circles. So I think that the point of having a team is still valid, especially if you're still creating YouTube content. But it's definitely a different game in the independent space.
Actually,
what's so funny about it though is that that's a return to the original Hollywood.
Yes,
I mean that is Chaplin, that is Buster Keaton. They all, specifically, Chaplin was the master at it. He did everything. Same thing. He was building sets. He was figuring out how to do the effects. I love that it's going back that way. And as a nerd, speaking from my perspective, I love that you get to play with all the different aspects of it. Although I need a blender.
yeah. Everyone needs a blender MF. And I completely agree. It's funny because I think of myself as growing up in a very interesting age of this, because as I was going to high school and as I was going through college, it was not clear that the internet was going to be a sustainable place to create a career. And so I would go to film conventions. The Austin Film Festival is one. And they had a digital film panel that I went to, because I remember looking at prices of cameras, and I could not afford, absolutely could never afford a film camera, but I could afford a digital camera. But I wasn't quite sure what the differences between one CCD and 3 CCDs were and what any of that meant. So I was hoping that this panel would teach me that. It didn't get into any of the technical stuff that I wanted to know, but I felt like that panel was really life-changing, because one of the things they said was stuff is so inexpensive. All the tools are so inexpensive now that either you can steal, or there's open source options, that your only excuse, if you want to make film, make film. That is my biggest advice to you.
Yeah.
And it still holds true to me today. If someone asks, how do I make YouTube videos? My answer is make YouTube videos.
Make YouTube videos. Yeah. Look, I used to say the
videos.
same thing to people about acting. I used to get questions about people say, how do you get into acting? How do you get into writing? How do you get into directing? It's like, just do it. I'm a big proponent of people talking about going to film school. I'm like, what? Take the money, make a movie. So, we Dog's Breakfast, the first thing we made was $60,000. Admittedly, we were in a different situation that I had access to the Stargate crew. So that helps. But I'm amazed at how few people took advantage of those things. Because I think there's a complacency that sets in when you've got a lot of money and time. You guys, you're talking about doing this internet stuff and having to do everything yourselves. The most frustrating part of the film industry for me was going from making films like that with friends in high school to suddenly being on set, and I couldn't even get my own coffee. People have to go and get coffee for you because they don't want you to be far away from the set. I was like, what? Like, I want to move cables. I want to light things. I want to move cameras. Like, why? I'm not in the scene. Why don't I do the sound? You know,
Absolutely.
it drove me crazy.
And to put almost like a pin on that, there, I think that there is a fear that a lot of people have whenever I give that advice of no, just go do it. That they're like, but I won't learn anything, or I won't get, like, I want to be able to learn before I do. And there's so many unintended things that happen when you just start to do, like meeting other people who are also doing, and just having those conversations with people about like, oh man, this thing has just been bothering me. Has anyone else been having that problem? And all the people who are also in the same trenches as you doing stuff, they'll all say like, yeah, absolutely. Like this is an issue. You know, I fixed it this way. Being able to be there and actually just working on something, even if you know in your heart of hearts that it's you know your taste is maybe better than what you're creating, just doing it, you're going to learn so much.
The Quad Force Video Drone is a self-contained, remotely piloted quadcopter kit with an onboard camera from Swan. Out of the box, you'll find most everything you need to get up and running in minutes: the quad, a remote, battery and charger, safety attachments, and spare props. Just add 4 AA batteries to the remote, connect the 3.7-volt 500 mAh LiPo battery pack to the charger, then plug the charger into any USB-powered port. When the red light turns off, in between 30 and 60 minutes, you're ready to fly. But before you take flight, first take a close look at your kit. The Quad Force measures 10 inches diagonally and uses 2 sets of counter-rotating 5¼ inch props. The props are turned by 4 in-running motors. Slung under the quad is a CMOS camera that can shoot 2560 by 1440 stills and 720p video at 30 frames per second. The camera rear loads micro SD cards up to 8 gigabytes, and a 2 gigabyte card is included in the kit. Sliding back the camera reveals the battery tray and just a glimpse of the single board receiver and flight controller that keeps the Quad Force in the air. The remote control is a 6-channel 2.4 GHz digital spread spectrum transmitter capable of controlling the quad out to about 100 meters, or 330 feet for us imperial folk. The left stick controls throttle and yaw of the quad, while the right stick gives you control over the forward, back, left-right movement. The top left button toggles between high and low power, letting you choose between performance and battery life. Pressing the top right button triggers the camera, while long pressing the button starts video recording. A simple LCD screen at the bottom of the remote shows your current control inputs, while the buttons to either side of the panel activate the onboard laser and bomb bay. Just kidding, those buttons are totally fake. With the battery charged, it's time to take to the air. Slide the battery into the battery tray and connect it to the quad. Attach the landing gear and the prop protectors. Put the quad on a level surface and turn it on. The lights will quick flash for a few seconds while the flight computer levels itself. Once the lights turn to a slow flash, turn on the transmitter and advance the throttle all the way up and back down to bind the remote to the quad. When the lights turn steady on, you're ready to fly. If you're a beginner, start slow. Give it just enough throttle to get off the ground and practice keeping the quad at the same altitude and location. Then start moving the quad back and forth, left and right, to get a feel for how the controls work. Once you've got that down, go crazy. The body and props of the Quad Force are color-coded, with yellow being the front of the vehicle. Combined with orange and green LEDs on the undercarriage, it's easy to know which way your quad is pointing during flight. Unlike most toy quads, the Quad Force can be used indoors and outdoors, as long as the wind isn't too strong. And the Quad Force can get up to quite a bit of speed even in its low power setting. The Quad Force is ridiculously fun to pilot. It's responsive, forgiving, and most importantly for beginners, it's really hard to kill. I crashed the Quad Force a lot. Into furniture, walls, the ground, Twit hosts.
$50. And it's
and more than its share of trees.
Oh no!
Not only is our review unit still running, but I haven't even had to replace the props. The standard battery will give you about 8 minutes of flight, but I was able to squeeze an extended battery into the tray for an additional 3 minutes. Also, the onboard camera is absolutely horrible at everything. Stills were blurry, the lens wasn't wide enough, and it's pointing in the wrong direction to see anything interesting. But I found that to be an advantage, because removing the camera and the prop guards bought me an additional 3 minutes of flight, giving me 15 minutes or so of quad awesomeness. In all, the Swan Quad Force video drone is an affordable, durable, easy-to-use platform for those who want to feel what it's like to fly a real quad, while not paying much more than you would for a toy.
Would.
That is so cool, Robert Balacer, Father Robert. So if you take the camera off, can you put a better camera on?
You could, but I mean, it doesn't support all that much weight.
It doesn't have that much.
It really doesn't have. And even if you could put a better camera on, it's such a shaky platform that you wouldn't really get great video or still.
So this isn't like the camera quadcopters that we've seen.
No.
You're not going to get those great, aerial views. This is just, but it is good for learning, I guess.
Yeah, the video is sort of an afterthought, but I mean, I'm building for know-how right now. I'm building the full-size quadcopters. This is really close to how those fly. So if you wanted to learn how to fly a quadcopter, you get this versus those toys, which are actually sometimes more expensive than this, which you can only fly indoors and they only really go up and down.
Just remarkable.
Yeah.
So pros and cons.
On the pros, crazy fun. Crazy. I just cannot stress enough how much fun
It looked like it.
is.
We saw that on the video.
We've been playing with this thing constantly for a month. Also incredibly durable. I actually crashed this thing into the side of a building, the third floor building. It fell all the way down onto its props, and nothing happened. It dinged it up a little bit. That's it.
And you hit several priests in the home. I thought.
But you didn't see that one with the shot zooming past me. There was actually a piece behind me, and so the very next thing you hear after the zoom is
Heavenly Father.
Also, $50 after rebates.
That's an amazing.
Great price.
Are the rebates available everywhere? I mean, you should shop around for this.
You got to shop around. So like Fry's has it for $70 with a $10 rebate. I found it online for $70 with a $20 rebate.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a really nice way to learn how to fly a quad. On the con side, first thing is the camera. I mean, they might as well not have put the camera.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't cost that much, and you can get decent shots as long as you're outside in absolutely no wind. And the other thing is the trim controls. If you've been flying for a while, you know the trim's important. Useless. Trim controls, they don't do anything.
I love it that these buttons don't do anything too. They just put fake buttons. Does the LCD do anything?
Oh yeah. So you can see
how
what
you're
kind
doing.
of input that you're giving to it with that. Oh, sorry if I scared you there. Actually, also this. Yeah. So looking at this, if I was going to give this a try, a buy, or don't buy, this is one of these products that is definitely a buy.
It's almost a must buy. Just don't think that you're using it for camera. I love how you throw it. I've never seen anybody just throw a drone and it flies. That's so
the
cool.
flight control computer is enough. It's powerful enough that it will level itself.
It says, "Oh, I know what's going on."
Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you a woman who needs no introduction if you're a fan of the Twit TV network. It's Mary Jo Foley. Mary Jo Foley, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's late over there. I think when you agreed to be on Padre's Corner, I did not think I was honest about the time. So thank you for being with us.
I think you were honest, but I think I didn't do the mental math.
I don't do mental math much either, so that's quite okay. Now, you're in New York right now. We were talking briefly before the show. It's crazy hot over there, right?
I know. It is crazy hot right now. Today it was 91 or 92. Today was the hottest day of the summer in New York this year.
Wait, what?
I know. Yep. It was actually a really beautiful summer here until September. And now it's suddenly 90 with 80% humidity. It was just miserable today.
We're actually seeing that over here in San Francisco, too. It's been mild the entire summer. In fact, we do this retreat in Los Altos, which is also here in California, just down the peninsula a little bit. And it's always 95 to 100 degrees every day. I don't think we had a day over 75. So maybe all the heat just stored up.
I know. Maybe it's our penance for having a great summer.
Okay. Now, let's not talk about the weather. What we want to talk about is about you. You have long been a member of the Twit TV family, longer than I've been here. You're respected. You're well regarded. You are our source for all things Microsoft.
That's good to hear.
Also, a woman, a few words. She doesn't like to toot her own horn. I understand this. But let me back up a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about where you came from? Because, sometimes we see these hosts on IPTV, on Twit TV, and we know what their specialty is. We know what they do. We know what they're competent in, but we don't know much more beyond that. I know you're from Boston, but how did you come to be the woman that you are today?
A very confused and odd path, I would say, Padre. I was born in Massachusetts, not far from where Paul Thurrott, my co-host, resides today. And I grew up there. But in between, I kind of traveled all over the U.S. and lived in many different cities in the U.S. and in the world. But all throughout that time, my passion was to be a writer. Ever since I was maybe, I'm not exaggerating here, like 5 years old, I wanted to be a writer. When people would say to you as a kid, what do you want to be? I used to just say a writer. And I don't really know where that came from because neither of my parents were writers. So I'm not really sure where I came up with that.
Now, when you talk about being a writer, did you want to be a fictional writer, or do you just wanted to write?
I really didn't know. It's funny. My mom reminds me of this a lot. She said one of my very early birthday presents when I was maybe like 8 or 9, she gave me a plastic typewriter, but it was a typewriter that really worked. And the first thing I did was create a newspaper for our family with me and my brothers and sisters as the reporters. And we created it like on a weekend basis and distributed it to my parents. So I don't know. There was some weird bug in my head from day one that I thought I wanted to be a journalist.
And you have no idea where the bug came from. I mean, it wasn't.
I really don't.
It wasn't a journalist that you'd read. It wasn't someone you saw on TV. It was just you had this deep-seated desire to write stuff.
Yeah, I think I didn't really know what journalist meant. Maybe I kind of was channeling Lois Lane. I don't know, but I don't know where that came from. And all I knew was throughout my middle school, high school, college, I kept saying, I want to be a writer, and I'm not really sure what that means or what form that's going to take or where I'm going to end up, but that's what I want to do.
Okay, so you want to be a writer. You've got this deep-seated desire, even though you don't know where it comes from. What do you do in order to make that happen? I mean, what did you go to journalism school? Did you major in it? What sort of solid, concrete steps did you take in order to make that come true?
Yeah, I did. I ended up going to college in Boston at Simmons College, which was an all-women's college, and I majored in what was called communications, which was basically journalism. Although some of the people in my track also ended up going into PR. So that I just kind of knew I want to do something in writing. I want to channel it that way. And I ended up having a really fantastic professor when I was in college who worked at the Boston Herald, which was one of the big newspapers at the time. And I would say his name was Alden Poole, and he was my mentor, basically. And I did whatever he told me to do as far as honing my career and specializing in journalism and figuring out how to go about becoming a journalist. He is the one who kind of got me on the track. I didn't really have a specialty. Like, I didn't know I wanted to be a tech journalist or a food journalist or whatever, but he just kind of guided me in learning the basics of what made somebody a good journalist.
Now, my brother did major in communications. He thought he wanted to be a journalist, but he wasn't really sure what he wanted to do. I mean, he wasn't sure if he wanted to write. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be on the radio. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be on TV. You obviously had a clear inkling that you wanted to write, but as you were going through your education, as you were going through college years and then your master's degree, were there certain cues that started guiding you in one direction or another? Because writing journalism, print journalism is actually huge. There's such a huge range of fields that you can take within that heading. What was it that grabbed you?
What's so funny now that the way our field has evolved, the parts I was the least interested in were radio and TV. I kept thinking, that's the last thing I want to do. I can't even imagine doing those parts. I don't want to be the person who's facing the camera. I want to be the person writing the words for the people who face the camera. So it's kind of ironic what's happened in our field now that everybody who is still in journalism, at least in the tech field, you kind of had to morph in your career and hone yourself so that you could do a little bit of everything. But that is the last part I wanted. I really love the part of digging into a story, doing the research, and writing it. And I didn't really care about the presenting of the story.
Oh, okay. So you're a research addict. I've seen these people before.
I am.
You love getting to the bottom of it. Tell me a bit more about that. So when you're researching a story, what do you do? I am a different generation where typically I read stuff that people like you write. Maybe I'll extrapolate. Maybe I'll look for a couple of different sources. But the true journalist, and there's very few true journalists anymore, can create a story out of nothing. It's like, for example, as a Jesuit, I will have to do multiple PhDs. And the whole idea behind a PhD is to contribute knowledge that did not exist before, to add to the corpus something that wasn't there. I think that's what a true journalist has to do on a daily basis. So how do you do it?
Yeah. And you know what? We a few of us who are still in the field who are kind of like the dinosaurs, we talk about people these days don't really know what it means to break a story, right? And so many people think, if somebody hands you a story like a PR department or a company, that's breaking a story. But the real way you break a story is people who you trust, who are your sources, they give you tips, and then you have to go out and kind of verify the tips and put them in context. And that's a real dying art in our field, but a really valuable part of our field. So I feel like that's kind of where I fit into the picture now in tech journalism is people send me tips or they send me complaints or rants, and I try to figure out what they're talking about and how big a deal it is, and to go back and piece together what went wrong or what's going on or what kind of things are on a roadmap that haven't been disclosed. And I feel like that's my contribution. I'm good at connecting the dots and putting the pieces together.
I think that may be the best description of the difference between a blogger and a journalist. And I'm not saying that blogger is not journalist, therefore is weak. I think they're just very, very different. A blogger can give context, but a blogger doesn't do all that much research. As you said, most bloggers will have a story that's written by someone else. They may combine it with facts from other stories that they've seen, and then they'll put it into their site, their whatever it is that how they reach their audience in a recontextualized way. But there still has to be that person who's searching for that nugget of truth. And I think here's another difference between bloggers and journalists that I'd love to get your input on. Bloggers typically have to do multiple stories every day. True journalists can't do that. And that's, I think, one of the things that has sort of killed off the field. If a journalist makes a fantastic story but can only do it once a month, he or she just doesn't make a living anymore, right?
Yeah. It's funny. I don't really draw the blogger journalist line that way because when people ask me these days what I do, I say I'm a blogger. To me, when you call yourself a blogger, it means that you're injecting your opinion in pieces that you write and that you're not pretending there's some unbiased truth. That's kind of how I define blogging. But I know what you're talking about. You're talking about people who regurgitate stories that other people create, and they don't have a lot of value add necessarily. And you're right. That is a tough place to be if you're the person generating the original content. You have to have a very solid financial backing, somebody who's allowing you to take the time to do the research. I actually worked a while back for a publication where we got 6 months to write a tech story. And it was expected you were going to take the full 6 months to do the research, the writing, the vetting, the fact checking. And man, those gigs are few and far between, especially in tech anymore. And I'm not saying just because you take a long time to do something, it means it's better. And in fact, that's actually not always true at all. But to have the luxury of the time where you can really dig into something and talk to multiple sources and talk to customers and partners and vendors, it really does make the story a lot more well-rounded. But these days, that's a luxury very few of us have.
Right. Who do you look up to? I can think of locally, we have the San Jose Mercury News here. And for my entire childhood, and actually most of my young adulthood, they were known as an investigative outfit. That's what they did. They did hard reporting. They did hard journalism. It took a long time to develop stories, but every time they released a story, it was award worthy. Recently, within the last 10 years, that's all gone. They can't afford it anymore. They can't keep all those qualified journalists on staff. They can't keep giving people all that time to do reporting. And so now we're at this point where most papers are just a regurgitation of the AP and other news sources. Do you lament that? Do you see that as, oh, good times gone, or is this just an evolution of your trade?
I think it's an evolution of our trade and not one I'm really all that happy about. But, it's funny when you are asking, who do I look up to? Do I have kind of role models or whatever? I don't really think of things that way. I admire good stories when I read them and really respect that people can still find time and ways to generate those with all the pressures of page views and clickbait and all that. But I don't really have people who I kind of idolize. I more just admire something good when I see it out in the field.
Right. I think that's a good way to do it. Let's take a step back, because I don't want to let you off the hook about your journey into tech journalism. I heard somewhere that your entree into tech journalism, because remember, we know that you wanted to write, you just didn't know what you were going to write about, was an accident. It was just luck of the draw.
It was. It definitely was. That's not even hyperbole. I graduated from college and was applying for jobs, and I was just kind of out there applying for anything and everything. I didn't really know where I'd end up. I knew I was going to have to come in at an entry-level position once I got out of college. And so I applied. One of the places I applied was a new startup magazine in the Boston area called Electronic Business that was a Connors publication. And I remember saying to them when I applied there, I don't know anything about tech. So if you guys hire me, you're going to have to train me. I literally know nothing. And they took me on anyway because they had let me do a writing test there while I was interning. And they liked what they saw. They saw some potential, I guess. And so they said, yep, even though you know zero about tech, we're going to take you on and let you learn on the job. So it was very much an accident for me to get in.
And, why did you stay in tech? I mean, that might have been why you got into it, but did you find satisfaction in what you were writing? Because I mean, I know that you had a couple of different choices. You could have written for a travel magazine. You could have gone into, more news outlet type writing. But after you had this first break with a tech outlet, you decided to stay.
I did. There's been some things that have kept me doing this, and I've been doing this more than 30 years now, which is kind of crazy to me that I stuck with it all that time. And I did a couple of times have ideas where maybe it was time for me to go, and I took some side diversions that almost took me out of the field. But the things I like about tech are, number one, even now, 30 years later, I feel like every day I learn something new. And I know that's not true of every job that you have in any field. Every day I feel like at the end of the day, wow, I learned X that I didn't know when I started today. And that's an awesome thing to get to have, the opportunity to learn all the time. I also get to interview like really legendary people in this field. Even though I have never taken a computer science class and I know nothing about programming, I've interviewed some really big names in tech. And that's very humbling and awesome too, because it makes you realize like, wow, there are these people out there, and the more I interview them, the more I feel like I know what I don't know. And that's a great thing to me too. And something that I feel like if I ended up in, I don't know, one of my friends ended up having her beat as covering the shoe industry. And I'm not saying you can't have that in that industry too, but I just feel like I'm covering an industry where what I learn and what I write about really makes a difference in multiple people's lives. And maybe you do too when you're covering shoes. I don't know, but I just don't feel like I regret the field that I ended up in.
Yeah, I guess it does add to the job satisfaction to know that there are so many other people who want to get a grasp on the thing that you're learning. Something else that you said that struck me is this idea of, as you're reporting, as you're researching, you're learning new things. Something I've heard from some friends who have been in the journalism business for a long time is some of them are in fields where there has literally been nothing new for the last 30 years. It's the same stuff over and over again, and it's rehashed, and they can write the stories with their eyes closed. It's a living but they never come home and say, oh, well, I learned something new today. It was, oh, there was another release of blah, 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 and it's just like the last release of blah, 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 but this one's going to make $5 billion. I think that matters, right? I mean, is that what keeps you fresh, keeps you coming back for it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of people say to me, wow, you only cover Microsoft. Like, that's your whole beat now. Isn't that boring? And everybody who says that to me, I said, do you know, like, the different fields that Microsoft spans? Like, in one day, I can write about everything from Windows to mobile devices to security to Xbox to CRM, health. I can write about almost any field because they are a company that spans every field. And I guess maybe if I was covering a company that was in one very narrow segment, I might feel kind of stymied by just being pegged into one beat or one company beat. But because they span so many things and because there's been so much change in the tech industry and in the places that they play, I never feel bored. I literally never feel bored.
Let's talk a little bit about Microsoft, because obviously, as you said, that's your beat. That's what you do. You are all about Microsoft. And the funny thing is, before I even met you on the Twit TV network years ago, I was doing a little bit of tech work, a little bit of journalism under a pen name, and people kept telling me, "Oh, you're working with Microsoft. You got to check out Mary Jo Foley. She knows things before people in the company know about it." And then when I came here, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is the Mary Jo Foley." But you are so synonymous with Microsoft. I mean, someone mentions Microsoft and they'll say, "Oh, Mary Jo Foley, go see her." Someone says Mary Jo Foley, they go, "Oh yeah, that's the woman who covers Microsoft." What is it about Microsoft? What brought you in? What were your big stories? What were your big gets that said, "Yeah, this is the company I want to cover"?
Another case of kind of where I ended up covering them by accident. So at the time I got hired by PC Week, which ultimately became eWeek in the industry, they hired me back then to cover Unix. So my beat at that time was covering Unix. I was the Unix reporter. So I covered Sun Microsystems and Digital Data General, like a lot of the companies that are no longer big deals. In fact, may no longer exist. But while I was covering Unix for PC Week, their person who was the Microsoft reporter at the publication decided to leave. So there was this big panic, like, oh man, who's going to become the Microsoft reporter? And nobody wanted to step up to the job because they knew it was kind of a big job. And finally they said, you know what, Mary Jo, she covers operating systems. She covers Unix. Unix, Windows NT, kind of the same thing. So she's the Microsoft reporter. That's how I got the job. I just was like, yeah, you're the default choice. So years before that, I had interviewed Bill Gates. In fact, the very first time I interviewed him was in 1984, right after I started covering tech, very, very early in my career. But then I kind of transitioned out of covering Microsoft, and I was doing Unix and databases and a lot of different other things in between. So when I ended up taking Microsoft as my full-time beat at eWeek, it was definitely just kind of like, hey, nobody else wants us. Here you go. You're the Microsoft reporter now. And it was a really big time when that transition happened, because it was before Windows 95. It was right when NT was starting to rise within the company, and they had just done their first release of Windows NT. So I just kind of was at the right place in the right time and got to cover them as they became more of a force in operating systems and other products.
Okay, I'm going to get mean here. I'm going to get devil's advocate for a bit. I hope you don't mind.
Nope.
There's always going to be people who say, okay, Mary Jo Foley is an intelligent woman. She obviously has chops. She obviously knows how to research. She obviously knows how to write. So why in God's good green earth would she choose to be associated with a company that is known mostly for bugs and defects and angry people? Mary Jo Foley, don't you know that Windows is a sinking boat? Why have you anchored yourself to the sinking boat?
You would bring up that story, wouldn't you, Padre? Yeah, that was like one of my big, like, kind of breaks into covering Microsoft when I got my hands on a memo right after they launched Windows 2000, that said there are still 63,000 bugs left in Windows 2000, and it was meant to be I believe, kind of an inspirational memo to the team. Like, yeah, you guys, you did it. You came out with this operating system, but you know what? There's tons of things we didn't resolve. And I tried to write it to some degree that way to explain that was kind of the motivational factor behind such a memo. But yeah, a lot of people are like, wow, you're covering a company that's done a lot of harm to the industry with like patches and Internet Explorer and antitrust. They bring all these things up, and it's like, how can you be in their corner? Well, I'm of the old school that says if you're covering a company, you're not, quote, in their corner. I'm not sure Microsoft still sees me as a friend. In fact, I would say many people and many teams at Microsoft see me as a foe even now. And I take pride in that because I'm not trying to hurt them or make false accusations or anything like that. But my job as a journalist is to report what's going on, whether it's positive or negative, and try to present that in a balanced way. And to me, in a way that helps customers and users and partners especially understand what's going on there and be able to use their products better. So my job isn't to be an advocate for Microsoft. It's just to explain what they're doing the best I can.
Right. And I think that's actually a good place to be. You don't want to be you don't want to be antagonistic to a company, but at the same time, if you're friendly and if you start getting things like early access to product or early access to briefings that no one else gets, then it can be problematic. I see that even from the amateur blogger side of saying, well, do I really want to accept review product from this company if I know I'm going to give it a bad review? Or that sort of integrity is something that I think we learn from the big guys, from the people who have done this job for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. Just because I was going to say, just because you get those briefings or early access, I don't think it necessarily means you're going to be a shill for the company. I've been on both sides. I've been blacklisted sometimes by Microsoft, and I've gotten early access sometimes, and different teams have treated me differently. But I think the thing you have to remember is, why ever they're giving you access or not giving you access, your job is still the same, which is to try to be fair and present products and strategies and an explanation of what they're doing as unbiasedly as you can, without not bringing an axe to grind even when you're mad that they're blocking you or that they're giving somebody else precedence over you. It's tough to do that. It's not human nature, but you got to try.
I believe that the best compliment we can give you is CR1 in the chat room is saying, Mary Jo Foley, you are a disgrace to Fox News. Let's leave it at that.
My work is done here.
Tiny house or to a micro apartment, both of them are essentially about the same idea of making do with less or sustainability. Now, but what if a tiny house, what if a micro apartment, what if one of those really small places was still too big for you? What if you looked at that and you said, oh, that looks interesting, but I don't really need a house at all. I just need some place to sleep. I need some place to put my clothes. I need some place to park my butt when I'm tired. Well, if that's the case, you probably need to talk to sustainability guru, Professor Jeff Wilson. He's the dean of Houston-Tillotson University College in Austin, Texas. He holds a PhD in environmental sciences from the University of Canterbury. He's a respected associate professor of biological sciences, and he's the recipient of one of the most competitive teaching honors in the United States, the Regents Outstanding Award. He has received funding from the National Science Foundation, from Ford Motor Company and Home Depot, and he is on the forefront of research into curriculum and sustainability. And he's got one message for you, and that is, maybe you don't need a house. Maybe what you need is a dumpster. That's right. Professor Wilson used to live in a 2,500 square foot house. He now lives in a converted dumpster that has, get this, 33 square feet of space. Now, he moved into the dumpster as a test of his convictions about sustainable living. It's part of his Project Dumpster. He wanted to build a low-impact, zero-net waste dwelling that would have as little impact on the planet as possible. Now, here's a rundown of what he has in his dumpster. He has 33 square feet of living space. He has a bed. He has 4 pairs of pants. He has 4 shirts. He has 3 pairs of shoes, 3 hats, 9 bow ties, all stored in a false floor with some cooking equipment designed for camping. Here's what he doesn't have. He doesn't have a shower, a sink, or a toilet. He doesn't have a washer or a dryer. He doesn't have a closet. He doesn't have a desk. He doesn't have running water. He doesn't have insulation. Now, recently he upgraded the dumpster so that now he has a sliding roof so that it doesn't rain on him. And they added an air conditioner because the temperature used to get to 130 degrees without one. And in the future, he hopes to add solar panels, a sleeping loft, a rainwater collection system, solar shower, and a garden. But here's the big thing. Over the last 3 months, and this is a project in which he's been living in this thing for many, many months, he has been able to pare down his life to the bare essentials. He's been able to ask himself the questions, well, what do I need to live? What's the bare minimum? What are the things that are absolutely essential to my life? And here's the big one. What are the things that I can count on the community to provide? All of those questions have been things that he has struggled with Project Dumpster, and it's been a fascinating experiment in sustainability. Imagine if people were able to get rid of all the junk that they have. Imagine if they were able to just strip away all the things that we've accumulated over the years, all the things that we think we need, all the things that we think we need to prove that we've made it. Well, in a word, that's Project Dumpster. That's us looking very intelligently at what we need for sustainability and making the smallest footprint on the earth as possible. Now, I'm not a hippie, and I'm not one of these people who's going to say, well, we should all live in a dumpster, or even that we should all live in a tiny house, or even that we should all live in a micro apartment. I think everyone needs to make a choice on their own about how much space they need and how much of an impact on Earth that they're going to have. Personally, in my life, I have sort of a built-in countdown timer. Every time I move, I have to consider what comes with me. And since I'm moving every 2 to 6 years, it means that every half decade, I'm clearing out all the clutter, and it doesn't make the trip with me to my next house. But I think most of us could have a serious conversation about what we need. With us being so mobile, with our generation being so connected, with us being citizens of the world, with us not wanting to use the benchmarks of past generations as to how big our cars are and how big our houses are, maybe most of us could have a higher quality of life if we all lived in a smaller house. Welcome, a guest, to Padre's Corner. You know this is my favorite time of the show where I get to talk to interesting people who I believe you should know about, whose work I think you should be exposed to, and this time I get to speak with Robert Stone, Oscar and Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker. He's here on Padre's Corner to talk about some of his films, including one called Pandora's Promise. Robert, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I remember the first time I ever tweeted you, it was completely out of the blue. I said, wow, I just watched Pandora's Promise. I thought it was a fantastic film. I thought it was very balanced because it did take in a lot from both sides, the pro-nuclear side and the anti-nuclear side. And it was just a fantastically woven story about nuclear power through the years. And it really struck a chord with me because I grew up in the Cold War. I was told that we could be nuked at any given time. And so I think I've always conflated nuclear power with the nuclear bomb. It's hard to like that.
Well, me too. I mean, I grew up in the shadow of the Cold War, and my first documentary that really started my career was an anti-nuclear film called Radio Bikini. Which is about the atomic bomb tests at Bikini Island. It got nominated for an Oscar, and it's considered by among anti-nuclear activists to be one of the seminal anti-nuclear documentaries of the 1980s. I mean, that's where I was coming from on this. So the story in Pandora's Promise, it profiles a number of environmentalists who've changed their minds about nuclear power, and their conversion on this, very much mirrors my own journey as well. Yeah. From being, if you'd asked me, just stop me on the street, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I'd have probably, and asked me if I was pro-nuclear or anti-nuclear, I would definitely have said I was anti-nuclear. Right. But I've never been an activist. I'm a filmmaker. I haven't been out protesting or anything, but that was my position, sure. This is part of the program of being a liberal Democrat, I guess.
Well, I mean, I was a conservative when I was a kid, but it was the same thing. I read about these tests, especially in the Bikini Atoll, where they basically destroyed the ecosystem and they've irradiated it and destroyed this beautiful corner of the Earth for no real good reason other than to saber rattle. And I remember that series of tests culminating with the huge explosion that went way over what they thought it was going to produce. That really set my mind against nuclear power. That and Chernobyl told me, look, nuclear power is just bad. There's no safe way to do it. But we're going to get to that. I know that that's going to be a contentious issue. I'm going to get the chat room in here. But before we get to that, I want to talk about how you came to documentary filmmaking. Because it is one thing to make a documentary. It's another thing to make several documentaries. And you've made several award-nominated documentaries. Tell me, what brings you to that? Where did you grow up? How did you get the film bug?
Wow. Well, you know, I mean, I started when I think I was in 7th grade. I absconded with my mom's Super 8 camera and went out and made a little movie. Actually, it was around the time of the first Earth Day, and I made a little documentary in my little town about pollution and littering and stuff like that, and cut it all together, and I got an A in my science class, and I was definitely not an A student, so that was a bit of encouragement. And I was always into movies, and you know, when I went to college, I wasn't doing all that well in college. I was studying history, and I ended up just hanging out in the film department, getting to know a bunch of filmmakers and like watching a lot of films, and then I made a film. And it got, you know, a lot of attention on campus, and suddenly girls were paying attention to me, and in ways that they hadn't before. And I found also that there is really nothing that I ever enjoyed more than making this little movie. It was just so much fun. I would just stay up all night cutting it, and I just got the bug, and I never looked back. I've been doing this now for 30 years, so yeah.
Now that's interesting because I've heard it another way from other people who have gotten into filmmaking, where they may have started with a documentary because they were passionate about it, but then they moved on because they wanted to do bigger films. They wanted to do other films. They wanted to do screenplays. I think there's a special kind of content creator who decides that he has enough passions. He has enough choices of things that he's passionate about that he can involve himself to stay the course and stay a documentary filmmaker. What does it take to be a documentary filmmaker? Because that is very different than another path you might take in filmmaking, right? I mean, it's not the same thing as shooting a fiction or a sci-fi movie. This is saying, I want to take an event, I want to take something that's important, and I want to expose it to the world.
Well, there's that. There's also just personal temperament. I mean, I like being my own boss. I'm really not good at taking orders, and you know, being a documentary filmmaker, you're very much your own boss, and you run your own life. And I've been able to do it remarkably. I mean, every time I make a film, I always think, oh my God, this is going to be the last film I ever make. How am I ever going to get money to do another one? And then and I used to get all like panicky about it. Now I've been doing this long enough. I kind of feel, well, things will work out, and they sort of do. But, you know, when I was in college, I always assumed I was going to make one documentary because, you know, that's an easy, affordable way to get into filmmaking. And then I was going to go make all these Hollywood movies or independent, you know, dramatic films. I thought that was what I was going to do. But I just ended up just one document. I just kept wanting to do it, and I got money to do it, and I enjoyed doing it, and I just kept doing it. And here I am, you know, I'm 55 years old, and I'm still doing it. It just sort of happened.
I think that's actually that's a great story for anyone's career, just to say, well, I just kept doing it. I enjoyed it, so there we go.
Well, it suits my temperament, I think, and I think honestly, I think it just in who I am, you know, getting to know myself a little better as I've gotten older. I think, you know, this is really my natural. This is who I should be, and this is who I am. I'm not sure I would have been a great feature narrative filmmaker, you know. I mean, maybe I would have been. I don't know. You know, life takes strange courses. You know, one thing, after I made my first film, I applied to the American Film Institute out in L.A. and I got in, and I thought that was going to be my route to making Hollywood films. But I chose not to go because I'd gotten a whole bunch of money to make a documentary. So there's choices we make in life.
It's interesting to look through the corpus of your work because your documentaries have really run the gamut of topics. You've done, of course, a few on nuclear power, but you also did Patty Hearst. You did one called Gorilla. You've done one called Oswald's Ghost. How do you choose what you're going to make your next documentary about? Obviously, there must be some personal interest involved. It's not just a roll of the dice.
No, I mean, I've kind of been mining my childhood, I think. I mean, my first film, Radio Bikini, was, about the bomb, which, overhung all of our lives growing up in the 60s and 70s, during the Cold War. And Oswald's Ghost, the Kennedy assassination and what the reverberations of that through the 60s and the 70s and the culture of conspiracy, that's what I made the film at. That was a big thing. Patty Hearst was like the biggest, craziest event I can remember from my childhood. And my film about the rise of the environmental movement, or Earth Days, that I did, and even the nuclear power film to a degree. I mean, I've been able to really try to. I grew up in this crazy time, and I grew up in a college town. My dad was a college professor, so I saw, even at a very early age, I was exposed to a lot of the madness that was going on in the late 60s and early 70s. And I think I've just been mining that and trying to explain it to myself and to other people. It's a way of revisiting my childhood, I guess, in a lot of ways. I think a lot of filmmakers do that. Yeah. A lot of writers, a lot of artists do that. They just mine their childhood.
Let me ask you a little bit about the response that you get to your work. Obviously, your work has found acclaim. You've been nominated for both 2 Emmys and an Academy Award. Mm-hmm. But what do you find in terms of feedback? Because again, it's not you don't make big budget films. You're not in front of the camera. You don't get the red carpets. You get something that you're very pleased with, that you had a lot of control over. I could see that as an allure of a documentary filmmaker, that the ability to control product from start to finish. But how do people respond? And what have been the most contentious subjects that you've ever covered?
Well, I've been fortunate that a lot of my films have been released in movie theaters, so that gives me an opportunity to experience my films with an audience. I've had 4 world premieres at the Sundance Film Festival. So, my films aren't just going out on television, which is kind of a weird sort of disembodied experience where it just sort of goes off and you're not experiencing with an audience. But to your last point, I mean, the most contentious film I've ever made is Pandora's Promise, by far. Absolutely. It's well, a lot of my films have been contentious. Gorilla, the Patty Hearst film, was contentious for some people. Oswald's Ghost was contentious, but this is by far the most contentious. And it's been the most exciting ride, since the film premiered at Sundance on January 2013. Yeah. I mean, I've been on the road with this film for a year and a half, all over the world.
No, I can vouch for that because since tweeting last week that you were going to be a guest on the show, probably 2 or 3 dozen hate tweets or emails from people who were saying, you can't have that man on, he's going to destroy the planet.
Well, they probably haven't seen the film. That's what's so funny is that the people who are most angry at me are the people who haven't seen the film. And a lot of, there's been when we were out in movie theaters, there were protesters who would show up picketing the film, and I would always invite them in because I wanted them to see the film. Don't protest something that you haven't seen, right? That's what the Nazis did, burning books and stuff. So come on in and see the film. And more often than not, they ended up coming up and shaking my hand afterwards. And, I didn't win them over, but they said they would thank me for making it. And they said it wasn't at all like they thought it was. There's all this stuff out on the internet. There's an entire website dedicated to my demise that was set up before the film ever premiered. It's like it was all set up by people who'd never seen it. The very idea of it was just set people off. How can anybody ever say anything good about nuclear power? That's just crazy. Who would ever do that? They must be evil.
Right. We know a little bit something about that here on Twit TV. It seems that goes hand in hand with the internet generation. This idea of symmetrical communication really does allow people to engage in activity and actions that they wouldn't otherwise do, including being very, very hateful. But let me ask you a little bit about that. We've had content producers on this show quite a bit. In fact, we had David Hewitt, who is an actor. He's a Hollywood actor, does a lot of sci-fi films. And he is incredibly intrigued by the potential that the internet has for allowing content creators to get their work in front of people in a way that wasn't possible before. Specifically, he said, I can go from having to work in a studio where there's 100 people all doing each individual jobs, and I have absolutely no control other than acting when the director tells me, to putting together a project and releasing it and potentially having millions of people see it over the internet. I saw Pandora's Promise over Netflix, and that's where I was first exposed to your work. How do you see the internet? And actually, I heard it was on YouTube, but actually, I went to that link that you gave us.
It got taken down.
It wasn't a good quality. It was horrible quality. You should go watch it on Netflix. But how do you see the internet? Is it a better way for you to get your message out?
Well, look, the internet is just one end of a longer food chain, which has good things and bad things. I mean, when I came up, when I started making films, we were shooting 16 millimeter film, and editing on these giant machines that cost thousands of dollars. The cameras cost thousands of dollars. The film, just to shoot 10 minutes of film, the film alone would cost you $100, and another $100 to process it. And I mean, that's just shoot 10 minutes of film. I mean, it was ridiculously expensive. It was very hard to even just get good at doing what you're doing, because it was so expensive just to to polish your craft. And now, anybody can go with a few $1,000s and get you self set up with an amazing, beautiful equipment that does a beautiful job. You can make films that look like Hollywood movies were 20 years ago, and the sound, you can do amazing things. You can cut with the computers. It's fantastic. So and that's allowed a lot more people to get into filmmaking and express their vision than was possible 20, 30 years ago, which is great, because I think we've just got a great diversity of views out there. The problem is that there's so much content that it's very hard for any of it to be seen, and for anybody to make any money at it, because it's all going out for free, pretty much. Nobody buys, DVDs was a big money stream for us a while ago. That's all pretty much completely dried up. So, I mean, I don't even expect to make a profit off my movies anymore. And I lived for years off of royalties from my films. That's just gone. I just expect to make, I try to make, I've been around for a long time. I've got a good reputation. I can get a pretty good budget to make a film, and I make a good living when I'm in production, and I just try to keep in production as much as possible. But I don't make royalties off my films anymore. It's just all gone. And I'm making much more expensive films too.
Well, then how does a documentary filmmaker make a living? I mean, if you're not getting royalties off your films, where does the money come from?
Well, I told you. I mean, I've been at it long enough that I can make a good living because I'm making big budget documentaries. I mean, big budgets. I mean, my films are, they're over $1 million to make, which is a big budget for a documentary. And I've been around for a long time, but I mean, there are not too many people who've done this as a career who don't have a trust fund or something like that. I mean, or a spouse who supports them. I mean, and in my case, I'm the breadwinner for my family, and I don't have a trust fund. But I've survived. But I'm a rare species. But it's easier because like I said, I came of age in a time when there weren't that many of us, and I was able to build a reputation when it was in a very different time. I think now to get started and to really make a name for yourself and to sustain a career is really, really hard. It's really hard because when you're starting out, you can't get the kinds of budgets to pay yourself anything. And like I say, every film I make, I think, this could be the last. This could be it. How can I keep going? It's very stressful. You have to be a certain type of person that can handle a lot of stress in life. I think also be sort of a pathological optimist that everything's going to work out.
Let me ask you one last question before we get to talking about nuclear power, about Pandora's Promise. You mentioned very briefly that you would have your hand shook by the people who see your movie, and maybe they haven't had their mind changed, but they're happy that you've made that story, that narrative. What is your purpose as a documentary filmmaker? What do you want to see in the audience as they're leaving? Is it just to inform them? Is it to change minds? Is it to perhaps open people to possibilities? What is your sacrosanct mission other than just creating?
Well, I came at this as somebody who's concerned about climate change, who's concerned about pollution, who's concerned about the future of our civilization that is, really, if you believe what the climate scientists are telling us, and I do, I know many of the senior climate scientists personally, and we are living on borrowed time, and we've got to stop burning fossil fuels. And we've had 25 years now since we've known about this problem. And really everything that the environmental movement, and I consider myself a part of that movement, everything that we've thrown at this problem has failed. Everything. And at a certain point, you have to just look at yourself in the mirror and go, am I just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, or what? If you're facing a potential climate catastrophe, and I'm a dad, and I care about the future of my children, or my sort of vision into the future. You got to ask yourself: Are we really solving this problem, or have we gotten ourselves stuck in a kind of ideological cul-de-sac from which we were actually part of the problem? And I think that's where a lot of the environmental movement has found themselves in opposing an energy technology that really can scale and really can solve this problem. And then so when one has to, as an environmentalist, one has to look at this and at least say, well, at least let me take a look at it and see if it's really as bad as I think it is. And that's, I think, what the journey that the film takes you on is through the eyes of people like myself who were very anti-nuclear, just came to this realization, as I did, like, we got to take a look at this and just see if it really is as bad as we thought, and then go through all the things, the waste, the safety, proliferation, cost, all the big problems with it. Are they really as bad as we thought? Because we really got to do something. And if it is as bad as we thought, then let's reject it and do something else. But you see the film, you see where the science and the facts take you is surprising.
Ladies and gentlemen, you probably know him if you're in tech. You probably love him. He's the nicest man in technology, Mr. Tim Stevens. Thank you so very much for coming on Padre's Corner.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm glad we were finally able to connect.
We've been trying to get together for a while, but you've been a really busy man the last year. Can you tell us what you've been working on?
Yeah, I've been traveling all over the place lately. One of the big projects I've been working on this year is coverage of the Google Lunar X Prize, which is a competition that Google sponsored to basically fund a team or incentivize teams who are trying to put rovers on the moon. So there's basically a race going on right now with a bunch of private teams around the world that are basically trying to land rovers on the moon. And then the first one to get to the moon and cover 500 meters wins a $20 million prize funded by Google. So I've been visiting quite a few of the teams here in the U.S. We've had a couple teams in India, Tokyo, elsewhere around the world, doing a series of videos on CNET to cover the series. So it's pretty exciting stuff, but it's made for a lot of travel over the past couple of months.
How in the world did you get involved with that? I mean, I know you've been involved in tech, and I've seen you on Twitter. You're traveling all over the place. But to hear that you're involved in a project that could, I don't say this lightly, could reshape the future of humanity, that's a little different than the regular journalist beat.
Yeah, and it's exciting stuff because these aren't major government entities that are doing this. These are small teams that are independently funded that are working on doing this. So one of the teams, Astrobotic, is actually based in Pittsburgh and is largely made up of students at Carnegie Mellon University. So, when I was in college, I did some pretty exciting stuff, but I certainly didn't do anything involving putting a rover on the moon. That's very exciting indeed. But I was actually lucky enough to be invited to the X Prize Visioneering Conference a couple of years back to participate there, which is kind of their annual get-together where a lot of people kind of powwow and figure out what are some of the world's biggest challenges and how they should address them. And so I've kind of maintained touch with the X Prize Foundation since then. And when the opportunity arose to kind of be a somewhat embedded journalist with this competition that's going on this summer, I definitely jumped at it. And thankfully, we were able to figure things out at CNET and at CBS to make sense to do it. So we've been covering throughout the year, and the year is winding down. There's some final testing going on over the next couple of weeks and couple of months. And then the final deadline for the competition is the end of next year. So we've still got a bit of a ways to go before people launch their rockets. But there's been a lot of good stuff going on this summer.
Tim, I got to ask this. I might as well ask it now. I was going to talk about this later in the conversation, but and now that we're into X Prize and this idea of privately funded ventures into space, one of the things that I hear a lot, and this may just be standard trolling, but it strikes a chord every once in a while, is that there's a Silicon Valley mindset that everything in the world can be solved with technology. And so they look at things like the X Prize, and they look at things that privately funded ventures into space exploration. And they say, well, is this really where we should be spending our money? The one that I hear most often in the circles I run in is, well, why can't we dedicate research towards curing hunger or growing more food or et cetera, et cetera? And that, of course, I'm in tech. That's not my stand. But have you heard any of that criticism? In doing your beats, do you ever get people saying, well, why are you always covering the pie in the sky technology? Why don't you ever do something closer to Earth?
Absolutely, yeah, and I've certainly heard that in relation to the X Prize, but ultimately they do quite a few competitions. It's just that some of them get more publicity than others. There was the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Cleanup Challenge a couple of years ago, actually, which was basically a fairly low-tech solution to basically solving oil cleanup issues in the ocean. You imagine a big oil slick, and the companies that are paid to clean up those oil slicks are paid by the hour. So there's really no incentive for them to improve their technology. But they threw an X Prize. It was funded by Wendy Schmidt, and ultimately they were able to get, I think, a 300% increase in performance, not with any real super high technology methods, just with kind of taking a new approach to sucking the oil off the surface of the ocean, and simply because nobody had really thought to bring any sort of incentivization to that series of problems, more or less. And just by having this simple competition, suddenly they were able to make a huge leap forward and solving something that is not, a pie in the sky dream, something that is not, something that's only going to be enjoyed by the elite in the world, but something that's a real problem for a lot of people. So there's quite a few things going on like that. There's a new learning challenge that just launched, basically coming up with a better way to teach people how to read in developing nations, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of great stuff going on as well. It's just that, for a variety of reasons, rockets to the moon tend to get a few more eyes involved than perhaps a device to clean up some sludge in the ocean, unfortunately.
Yeah. But, it should be stated that one of the things that we learned from the Apollo project was how much trickle down there is in the technology. Right. I mean, yes, you spend billions and billions of dollars to send rockets into space, but along with that, you get advancements in computing power and in material science. And all those things do affect all the other parts of life. So at least, okay, that's the way that I grew up. And that's what I was always told about the space program. And that's what I've grown to believe. But it makes for a good narrative, don't you think?
Absolutely, it does, especially because there are a variety of economies that can be utilized on the moon and elsewhere in space. There's companies like Planetary Resources that are hoping to mine asteroids and pull back some very valuable minerals that are very difficult to find here on Earth, heavy metals and such that are very difficult to find and very environmentally dangerous to source here on Earth, could perhaps be more easily found in space and brought back to Earth. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And also, of course, when it comes to space exploration, one of the teams is actually hoping to explore some lunar caverns and see if there are actually caves on the moon that could be settled. And if there are, then that means that it'll be much easier to set up a human settlement on the moon, because you wouldn't need to basically bring a house with you. You could just move into a cave and build a wall and you'd be good to go. So those sorts of discoveries could actually be very, very valuable going forward for space exploration and for future economies that we don't even know about yet.
Right. Let's take a step back from SpaceX and space exploration. We hear that from you. I mean, if anyone here has read your work, they know how deep you are into technology. But I want to talk a little bit about you. We don't get to talk about Tim Stevens enough. Can you tell us, where did you come from? Where were you born? How did you grow up?
Where did I come from? Well, I came from Vermont, actually, which is a place with not a whole lot of technology going on, although it is home to some of the fastest internet in the United States, I'm proud to say. But yeah, I grew up in a small town in Vermont, in the southeastern portion of the state, and then, had a wonderful, idyllic childhood there. Moved to New York, and then, went to school and studied for writing and software development. I wasn't really sure which path I wanted to choose, but I graduated right at the peak of the dot-com boom, which pretty much made up my mind for me. So I went into software consulting, did about an 8-year stint as software development, and then worked my way up to software architect and then enterprise architect. And then kind of got sick of that and had the opportunity to jump over to Engadget and do some full-time blogging there. I'd always been writing the whole time. I actually got my start writing while I was in college doing freelance video game development and game reviews. So my first gig was writing a review of Spot Goes to Hollywood, I think it was the game on the Sega Saturn. I got that gig not because of my game writing skills, but because I was one of the few people who actually bought a Sega Saturn and so could play the game and write the review. And then, I kept up on the game reviewing while I was doing the software development thing, switched over to Engadget full-time after about 8 or 9 years in the software development field. And then I guess the rest is history. I was lucky enough to be able to be editor-in-chief at Engadget for almost 3 years, I think. And then about a year ago, switched over to CNET, and I've been very happy here since then.
Let me ask you about that transition between software developer and journalist, because I actually took the same path. I did my degree in software development, in software engineering, computer engineering, and I also did a fine arts minor. And I remember thinking, well, software development is fun, and I can do it, and I've got a mind for it. But at one point, I just said, this is no longer exciting. I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. What was that path for you? I mean, obviously, you spent more time in that field than I did, but that is still a pretty big jump to go between I'm going to consult and create software to I'm going to write about the industry.
It is a big jump on one level, but I was actually lucky enough to be able to do it in a pretty gradual way. Like I said, I got my start writing in college as well, and I always kept some freelance gigs just to kind of keep my feet in it here and there, but it was always, writing on weekends, writing in the mornings, that kind of thing. And I actually started writing at Engadget in 2005, just doing the odd post here and there. And then after a while, I'd start to get up at 5 in the morning and do maybe 2 or 3 hours of blogging. And then it got to be that I was doing 3 and 4 hours of blogging. And then it got to the point where I was actually cutting back on my consulting hours so that I could spend more time doing blogging. So it got to the point where I was kind of doing half and half. So I was actually able to make a pretty gradual transition before finally jumping over full time. But for me, it was always kind of similar creative thought process when it comes to staring at a blank text editor and writing a piece of code or writing a blog post. In fact, I use the same text editor for coding and for blogging, which maybe is another reason that it seemed like a pretty gradual transition. But for me, it was always the same sort of mental process, thinking of what's the best way to tackle this individual module or this individual component, or the best way to deliver this message that I'm trying to get across in 150 words. So it was a pretty similar thing for me anyway, but I still love both. I still love coding. I still bring up a text editor and knock out a module or a component just for kicks every now and again. But for me, writing has always been my biggest passion.
That's just absolutely fascinating that you could conflate the two. I mean, for me, when I made the switch, I didn't think I was using any of my coding knowledge anymore when I started actually writing stories. Originally, it wasn't about technology, but yeah, I guess I could see that. It's the same attention to detail. It's the same process that you would go through for serious journalism. But I want to talk about that transition you were speaking of, where when you started blogging and then you were doing more blogging and then you had to hit the halfway point and then you made the transition. You speak about it very quickly, but that's actually a very important moment for a lot of new media creators when they start thinking about, well, I like doing this. I may have this job and this job provides for me, but I do this thing in my free time, this blog, and it excites me and it gets me impassioned and I get to write about things I really care about, but can I make a living at it? When did you hit that point at which you realized, I don't need this other thing anymore? I can actually make a living from the writing, from the blogging. I can make a living by letting people hear my opinions on things.
It was definitely a very gradual process as well. I think I was at Engadget for a little over 3 years before I became the editor-in-chief. And through that time, I sort of progressed up from just, kind of a contributor to an associate editor. And then I became the automotive editor at Engadget, the first and still the only automotive editor at Engadget, just because I was really pushing the editorial leadership at the time to do more coverage of the automotive scene, because at that point, the tech crossover in automotive was just beginning. Smartphone connectivity was starting to become a thing, and I felt like we really needed to be doing more of that. So I really pushed forward there, and that ultimately opened the door for a lot more writing for me, and definitely, opened the door for more financial incentive as well. But I didn't really make the full jump 100%, giving up on software development until the editor-in-chief opportunity presented itself. That was still a big decision, because I knew that was a big commitment to give up on the software development thing, the thing that I spent 4 years in college for, spent all that money and got that degree, and had about 8 years of experience, and had a very stellar career behind me that I was about to leave behind. So that was not an easy decision at all. There was a lot of discussion back and forth between myself and AOL, who of course owns Engadget, the executives there, whether or not that made sense. My wife and I had a lot of discussions. Darren Murph, a very good friend of mine, and I spent a lot of time talking on the phone. He ultimately became my managing editor at the time. So there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussions. It was not an easy decision, but ultimately it was one I decided to go for, and I'm very glad that I did.
I think we actually had you on Twit the week where you announced it, when you finally made it public. And I got to say, it was one of those things of, wait, what? What's he doing? Wait, why is he doing that? And it is kind of interesting because, again, we live in a small circle, even though that small circle is getting bigger and bigger all the time, of people who are really passionate about tech. I mean, more passionate about tech than about politics, about pretty much anything else that happens. They want to know what's going on with the companies that they buy their products from. They want to know what's happening to the technologies that they're hoping will be the next generation of a big thing. And they get attached to the personalities, to the journalists who present that information to them. And we've seen it here. Whenever you have someone move from one place to another, there's so much angst and anger and fear and just sometimes just horrible things that happen. You've seen that.
Comments as well. Yes, absolutely. I've been on the receiving end of that. Yeah, I still remember making that announcement post and reading the comments and shaking my head and thinking, what the hell have I gotten myself into? But ultimately, I think, those transitions are never easy, whether you're on, whether you're a part of the transition yourself or whether you're simply, a receiver of the content. And so you're, getting your content from a different source. We worked really, really hard to maintain the integrity of Engadget, to maintain the same voice and the same feel of the site. And I think we did a really, really good job. We broke our backs to maintain that. It was obviously a very traumatic time for a variety of reasons. If you're familiar with the history of the time and the departures and everything else that went on, there was quite a bit of trauma at that time. But we worked really, really hard, the entire team and myself. Did everything we could to maintain the voice of the site. And I think that readers who stayed on board at Engadget at the time will agree that we did a pretty damn good job of that. So I'm quite proud of the work that we did then. It wasn't easy by any means, but my goal at the time was to maintain the status quo, and then ultimately, once we got things stable, to really raise the bar. And over the next 2.5 years, I think we really did that for sure. And I was very proud of a lot of things that we launched. The Engadget Expand series we launched, the Engadget Show we maintained. We launched a tablet magazine that I was hugely proud of. We did a lot of great things, and I think that's testament to the power of bringing in a new voice, a new perspective every now and again. It's important to do that, and I think it's important to make some changes for sure. They're not always easy. I've certainly been on the receiving end of some painful transitions myself, but ultimately, I think things work out for the best.
It's incredibly difficult to do a transition that's not going to alienate a whole bunch of people, both audience and talent. But that one actually went, I'd say, significantly well as far as transitions can go.
Thank you.
People that fire up. But actually, we do have a question here from the chat room. JJ to the 4884 wants to know if you would have any advice for, say, a young graduate or someone who's still in college who might be looking to get into tech journalism. Because in a way, I think we were lucky because we were kind of that transition generation where we didn't know that you could make blogging and things on the internet as a career. Now that people know it feels almost as if it's far more difficult to get in, to make a name for yourself. What would you say to someone who comes up to you and says, Mr. Stevens, I'm going to be graduating next year. I'm passionate about technology. I'm passionate about my writing. What should I do? Who should I meet? Who should I write to get a toehold in this industry?
It is definitely harder to make a name for yourself, but it's so much easier to get into it. There's so many great tools and so many great areas to specialize. And I think specialization is a very important thing if you're getting started. If you start out and you want to cover everything in a very broad way, and if the only thing that you want to bring to the table is your perspective, that's going to be a very difficult thing, because ultimately, if you're just getting started, there aren't really that many people who are, to be perfectly bluntly honest, there aren't really that many people who are going to really care what your perspective is. So what you need to do is bring a different perspective to a given area of coverage, bring something very, very focused, and become ultimately the go-to resource for something. It can be as narrow as you like, a specific genre of video game, a specific upgrade for your computer, a specific series of apps on smartphones. Pick something that you can absolutely dominate and become the resource for that given thing. And I think that's the best way if you want to get noticed. Obviously that'll give you a bit of a toehold, just a little bit that you can then start to build upon. Once you build your audience, it's easier to build out from there than trying to just start and cover the entire industry. That's going to be a challenge. The thing, of course, is to write and to get out there, get your word out there as much as you can, and get as much feedback as you possibly can. If you don't absolutely love writing, if you don't absolutely love journalism, and this is going to be a very, very difficult thing, because you're going to get beaten at every step. There are going to be people who get the story quicker than you. There are going to be people who get the story better than you. So you're going to need to learn from those mistakes, and you're not going to do that if you're not out there every day trying to do this. So if you can find a site that you respect and try to volunteer for them, see if you can do some contributions in exchange for getting good feedback from editors there. You probably start with a smaller site, but find a site that you respect. And if that doesn't work out, then start your own thing. It's so easy to make a blog these days. That's something that's changed over the past couple of years. Just create a site and, again, find a niche and absolutely own it. I think that's the most important thing.
That's fantastic advice, because I know there's a lot of people who are generalists. I tend to be a generalist. I know a lot about technology, but at some point I focused in on 2 or 3 things that I was really passionate about. And like you said, I said, I'm going to become an expert at this. I'm going to know all the answers, and I'm going to be able to be a person you can go to as a resource. And I think that's what made the difference. You can be smart, you can write well, but unless you're recognized as someone who should be quoted, someone who you should listen to, it gets very difficult to break into the game.
Yeah, for me, when I was still doing game journalism, I tried to specialize on racing games in particular, because I've always loved racing and I've loved video games, and it was a pretty good mix. So I actually started my own blog on racing games in particular, and it got pretty good traction in that circle of readership. So I kind of became one of the go-to people when it came to wanting to know what the latest and greatest race simulator was, or a race mod was, that kind of thing. And ultimately, that got me some links here and there, a little bit of traction, and that's kind of what got me the exposure to ultimately get me in at Engadget.
I've been storing this up for a bit. I know it's been a while since I've gone on a rant on Padre's Corner, but I think it's kind of time. Now, we know that last week President Obama asked the FCC officially, publicly, to consider Title II in the regulation of the telecommunication industry. Specifically, he wanted to follow up on the 1996 Telecommunications Act that allowed the FCC to classify ISPs as either a telecommunication service or an information service. Back then, the ISPs lobbied to be classified as an information service, and in 2002, the FCC agreed with them. Now remember, telecommunication services are common carrier. They can only transmit and receive data. They're dumb pipes. You can make money on them, but you're not allowed to tier it. You have to be available to all competitors in order to foster competition. An information service, however, because it's processing that data, isn't a dumb pipe. It isn't a common carrier, and they can charge pretty much anything they want. Now, there's a lot of screaming going back and forth across the net, and I really don't want to get involved in that. There's too much noise. There's too much anger. I want to step back a little bit from the whole idea of regulation and government involvement and whether Title II is a bad idea. There's actually something that's far more important, far more base than whether or not a Title II nuclear option is the way to go. Now, let's look at the arguments here. The Obama administration is claiming that the use of Title II to reclassify telecommunication services would prevent ISPs from throttling data flows, which I think we can all agree is good. It would make peering arrangements between ISPs and backbone providers transparent to the FCC, so the FCC can actually see if there's undue profit taking. And it would ban the paid prioritization of traffic. So you couldn't have one company saying, I would like you to deliver my content faster than another content, thereby putting them at a competitive disadvantage. Now, for their part, what the broadband providers are saying that they don't need regulations, that the market will always correct. They're also saying that regulating telcos would kill investment in infrastructure because what company is going to put money into something that they can't make profit from? And also they're arguing that it would kill jobs. Here's the thing. That may all be true. That may all be right. But it's not about that. The broadband industry would like to turn this into a debate about regulation. They claim that if you're for net neutrality, then you are for regulation. They claim that if you are for net neutrality, then you are against the free market. They claim that if you are for net neutrality, then you want government intervention. But that's not the case. That's not even close. I can only speak for myself, but I assume that there are other like-minded individuals who hold my same beliefs about net neutrality, and that is, I don't think that everything can be solved by regulation. I do believe that the free market works most of the time, and I don't want government intervention unless it is the very last resort. But folks, this is the last resort. What a lot of people don't realize is that this isn't an issue for 2014. This isn't an even issue for the 2000s, for the new millennium. This is something that goes back 30 years. 30 years of the American public getting shafted over and over again. The truth is that the American public has been getting backed into an internet corner by ISPs since 1984. The year that the telecommunications legislation gave away bits and pieces of our infrastructure in exchange for what we call the public good, the common good. The cable and telcos took those bits and pieces and they made a fortune deploying fiber and charging whatever they wanted. They made billions and billions of profits, but the problem is we never held their feet to the fire about that last part, that you can have that profit, you can have that revenue, you can have that infrastructure as long as you provide for the public good. We've forgotten that it's not just a promise, but something that they actually were supposed to do. Now, the Cable Communications Act of 1994 is what allowed Comcast, Time Warner, Cox, and others to make billions with a functional monopoly and cable-derived content connectivity set. The act was created to cut through all the red tape. Essentially what they wanted to do is they wanted to encourage investment in infrastructure, specifically infrastructure to deliver programming and services through cable deployed through cities and towns of the United States. Now, they looked at that balance of who should have power over what goes where. And on one hand, you had the cable companies, and on the other hand, you had the local government. What they decided was best for the people at that time was to put the power into the hands of the cable companies with one caveat. And that caveat is actually spelled out in that Cable Communications Act, specifically that in exchange for establishing franchise standards and procedures, the act would demand that cable operators were expected to be receptive to their local communities' needs and interests. It sounded good, but the problem is that that promise wasn't actual legislation that could be enforced. The cable companies grew rich, but they ignored their responsibility to provide for the public good. Now, 2 decades ago, the telcos promised that all they needed was more money, a little bit more money, a little bit more time, and a little bit more patience to invest in infrastructure to create a nationwide broadband network. Now, they promised that they could deliver 45 megabits per second to 86 million homes in all 50 states. And to that end, they said, well, we're going to need something from you. And what the government did was said, okay, we will give you tax breaks. We will give you incentives. In fact, we will give you something approaching $200 billion of American taxpayer dollars for you to do this project. Well, just this year, the telcos, the same telcos, AT&T and Verizon, came back to the FCC. They came back to the United States government, and they said, well, we spent all the money, and we weren't really able to deliver the 45 megabit per second lines to 86 million Americans, but we did give 1.5 megabit per second DSL lines to 20 million. That's close enough, right? Let's call it even. And they got off the hook. They were given that money. They were given that patience. They were given the right of way to make all that profit as long as they looked out for the public good. But the problem was that legislation couldn't be enforced. AT&T, Verizon grew rich, and they ignored their responsibility to provide for the public good. Now, in 2013, Comcast finished their acquisition of NBC. Now, there were serious concerns about the vertical integration of Comcast and NBC. Basically, there were people who said it's not a good idea to have the company responsible for the delivery of content to own their own content company. Just natural thinking says that they're going to favor their own content over the content of their competitors. Now, in order to push through this acquisition, Comcast promised that they would not use the new conglomerate to unfairly disadvantage competitors of NBC who wanted to deliver content over their tubes. They promised that they would watch out for the common good. But in 2014, they did just that. They throttled Netflix, a major competitor to NBC, to in fact, all companies that are not cord cutters. The problem was that the legislation could not be enforced. Comcast grew rich, and they ignored their responsibility, their promise to watch out for the common good. In 2014, AT&T, under pressure from municipal plans and Google Fiber, announced that they were going to roll out high-speed fiber to 100 cities, which was a great turn from 2013, where they told people, point blank, you don't want high speed. You don't need high speed. Now, this wasn't a grand gesture. It was to stem the bleeding. AT&T did not want Google Fiber making inroads, and they specifically did not want towns and cities to build out their municipal wireless and their municipal fiber. So they offered this plan, which according to the rules of the Telecommunication Act, if AT&T is going to come into your town, it means it kills a municipal fiber rollout. Well, they said that they were doing this for the common good. They say that they were doing this to fulfill the plan, the promise of that $200 billion in subsidies that they got from the United States government. But last week when Obama made his announcement, AT&T said they were officially putting the halt, the kibosh, the pause on that 100 city rollout. Now, folks, I hope you're seeing the pattern here. We've had weak legislation, but it's not really corrupt legislation. It's just really gullible. Now, there are going to be those who say, well, of course, that's how these companies act, because that's how all big corporations act, to make a profit. And that does make sense. But they forget that the reason why these companies are so big, the reason why these companies have made so much profit, the reason why these companies are in the position that they are today is because they made it on the promises that they have not fulfilled. It's a promise that has been broken time and time again, year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation for 30 years. And I think the problem is that it's been happening for so long that we, the American people, have forgotten that this is what they promised us. That we shouldn't be grateful that AT&T says they're going to roll out to 100 cities across America. It's something that they promised and we paid for. We shouldn't be grateful that NBC and Comcast aren't going to throttle the programming of other internet companies. It's something that they promised when we allowed them to become a conglomerate. We shouldn't be grateful to Verizon when they give us higher speed Fios in the cities that we want, because it's something that they promised to do when they tried to acquire a satellite provider. The thing that people don't seem to understand is that these corporations have gotten rich off of the resources and the patience of the American people. And folks, I think it's time for them to pay some of it back. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce to you Mr. Andy Weir. Andy, thank you so very much for being on Padre's Corner.
Thanks for having me.
Now we have never met. You've been on the Twit TV network before. I believe you did an episode of Triangulation. But yeah. You're a Bay Area local, right?
Yeah, that's right. I live in Mountain View.
Oh, how about that? Okay. And you're a geek. I mean, this is one of the things that I think has really come through in your books. A lot of time we see writers who research something. They may not have a passion for it, but they do their homework. They do the work that they need to do in order to sound competent as they're writing it. But in your work, you could tell that you are actually interested in the material that you're putting on page.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've been pretty much obsessed with the space program, manned and unmanned space flight. Whichever country is up to it, I'm all about it. And I'm just ever since I was a kid. So all my life, it's a deep, deep interest of mine.
Well, we're going to come to that because, I do want to talk a little bit about space. And I especially want to talk about what it is about space exploration that just ignites imagination in some people, not everyone. But before we do that, can we jump in a time machine and go back a little bit? Because I want to talk about how you got to where you are today. You are a computer programmer by trade. I mean, that's what you do, right? I mean, yes, you write, but you're also a fantastic programmer.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was a computer programmer for 25 years. I just left. I just quit my job in April to go full time on the writing because The Martian was selling really well. Being a writer was a kind of a lifelong dream of mine, which I took a stab at when I was in my late 20s. And I took 3 years off of work. I wrote a book, not The Martian. It was a previous book. And I couldn't get an agent, couldn't get a publisher interested, the usual writer's story. And then from then on, I figured, okay, I'll just be writing for fun and posting things to my website. And that's all I thought would ever happen. But then The Martian took off in popularity and got to where it is now. So now I'm a full-time writer.
We definitely want to talk about The Martian because it is, for people who don't know the story, it is a fascinating story of how it went from your mind to the internet to the world. And I think, you know, the other thing here is the way that you promoted this book, the way that you got it out to the public, I think could be a case study for anybody ever looking at doing viral marketing because it went viral in a big way. It was all word of mouth. But let's go back even before that. Tell me about your passion for space, your passion for technology, because obviously you grew up with it. But when did you find out that this was something you wanted to do? I mean, I'm sure that the writing was always there, but where did the technology aspect come into play?
You know, I just don't remember a time in my life when I wasn't into that. I think I was pretty well indoctrinated by my dad, who was, you know, a space geek himself, and he's a particle physicist. So it was always just around science, technology, math. It was always something that was, you know, interesting and exciting to me. And of course, Dad fostered that.
Well, what did you find interesting and exciting about space?
I don't know. It's just it's untamed. It's like we don't have any control over it. It's so hard to get to that even with all of our technology, which makes life really comfortable for us here on Earth, we still can barely get people into the closest part of space to our planet. It's like this huge untapped infinite void that we've basically never been to.
You know, I find it strange. I'm like you. I geek out over anything space. Every time there's a space article, I want to put it in my shows. When I was in high school, I did every single bit of research I could on Project Orion and nuclear pulse propulsion. You know, because I thought, this is the way we get to the stars. We throw nuclear bombs out of the back of the ship. But yeah. For me, and maybe this isn't for you as well, I was always puzzled when I would meet people. And I'm not talking about just anybody. I'm like people who were interested in science and technology who had no interest in space. And I couldn't understand that. I didn't understand how you could like technology or you could like science and not see how space is doing the most exciting things in both of those fields.
Yeah, but you can draw an analog. I mean, it's like, why aren't we putting more effort into figuring out, you know, things about the ocean floor? We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the ocean floor. But there's something about space that captures the imagination. Maybe a large part of it is you can literally see it from here. You can just look up and there's space and you're like, well, it seems like we should be able to get there more easily.
Well, it depends because we both live in the Bay Area, and if I look up, I see light pollution, but that's another thing. That's neither here nor there.
You'll probably see the moon, though.
Yes, at least that. One of my co-hosts on one of my other shows, This Week in Enterprise Tech, he works with the University of Hawaii, and they have an observatory that's 3.5 miles down. And they just went out there on a big boat. They had to replace some of the lights, and they put down a new a camera. So they're streaming 24/7 from the bottom of the ocean floor. And every once in a while, you'll see like weird things wander past the camera. But he was saying how he has students who look at that and they say, oh, well, you know, that should be easy. We've gone into space. And he's like, well, no. You know, you go into space and you have somewhere between 0 and 1 pressure, or 1 atmosphere pressure. You know, down where my observatory is, it's 500 plus atmospheres of pressure. Yet, I am more interested in space than I am in the bottom of the ocean. I will fess up to that.
Yeah, so it's not just the technological challenges. I think there's something about space that captures the imagination. The ocean just doesn't seem that foreign or that far away. It's part of Earth and it's part of our own biosphere, and we know largely what to expect down there. A lot of water and some really cool, interesting aquatic life. But space is like, we don't know anything until the early 1960s. We didn't know what the other side of the moon looked like. Just think about that. It's only for the past 50 years that, out of all of mankind's history, only the last 50 years did we even know what the other side of our own moon looked like.
Have you been following the Rosetta mission?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, go ESA. Well done.
I know, exactly.
A hell of a job.
It's 310 million miles away. How many? 6.4 billion miles traveled to do the intercept. And then basically you're trying to play the claw game from millions of miles away.
Yep.
Yeah, it blows me away.
Yeah, it's an incredible accomplishment, and they should be very proud, and they are, and as well they should be. It's really awesome. It's down there. It's taking samples. It's telling you what the for lack of a better word, atmosphere of the comet is made of. I mean, it's returning real data. It's not just some kind of publicity stunt, take a picture and call it a day thing. It's analyzing the comet.
Right. Did you see that panorama from Rosetta that showed how the probe actually skipped across the surface?
Yeah.
Because the harpoon didn't fire?
Right. It went doing and then went up almost a kilometer, and then it finally came back down because the comet doesn't have a lot of gravity.
Right. Well, that's the thing. When I heard about that, I'm like, wait a minute. This comet, 67 doesn't have any speakable gravity, really. I didn't think. I'm like, if it impacted, it should have just bounced straight back out. I guess it has just enough.
It must have, yeah, or something. I mean, either the comet has some gravity, although it is really small, but I mean, compared to planetoids. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what the escape velocity at the surface of that comet is. It's going to be low, but apparently it's less than how fast the probe was going after it hit the ground and bounced back up.
Yeah.
The probe might have been going really slowly. I mean, it might have only been going like a meter per second, and it took it an hour to fall back down. I don't know.
Yeah. Dr. Morbius is saying that the lander weighs as much as a sheet of paper. Actually, I think it was 220 pounds, and it was about the size of a washing machine. I think.
I think what he meant by weighing as much as a sheet of paper was that's the force applied by the comet's gravity on the lander. It's about the same as Earth's gravity on a piece of paper.
Exactly. Now, can we talk a little bit about the Martian? Because I don't want to give any spoilers.
I don't know. I suppose we could talk about that.
I guess so. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are still people in our chat room who have not read or listened to the audiobook.
Okay,
if that's the case,
clear up spoilers. Then
yeah, we have to fix that because they have to. But seriously, this was a great. I have listened to my audiobook probably about 45 times. I don't. It's enjoyable every time. For long drives, it's great. Let's do the general plot. So the general plot is this is somewhere in the future. This is a mission to Mars. It's a 30-day mission. On Sol 6, so Martian Day 6, there's a dust storm. Bad things happen. Most of the crew leaves. One astronaut by the name of Mark Watney gets left behind.
Yeah, and the crew thought he was dead, and they had every reason to think he was dead. So it's not like they just ditched him. They thought he was dead, and now he's stranded there. And also, his ability to communicate with Earth was ruined by the storm. So nobody knows he's alive, and he's got to try to survive with the supplies he has on hand, which were designed to last a crew of 31 souls, and then they were going to go home. But now he's just stuck there.
Right. So yeah, 31 souls. He's got, I think they actually sent enough food for, was it 60 days for each crew member?
56.
56 days, right, because they wanted to account for a probe or two crashing. He's alone, so his food will last about a year, but he realizes that the next mission is going to be there in 4 years. So do the math, and that's basically what the book is about. But it's not as simple as that. One of the things that I think captured the imagination of geeks everywhere was that you didn't Star Trek it. There's no Star Wars here. There's no flimsy science fiction where suddenly there's a new piece of technology that will save everything. You did the legwork to look at the technologies that either exist now or would exist at that time. You looked at how they would actually work, and then you built a MacGyver story about that. A man on a desert planet who figures out how he's going to eat, breathe, and sleep and travel millions of miles away from home. I think that just caught me.
Yeah, thanks. It was a lot of research, a lot of like kind of like fiddly math and working on that stuff on my own. It took me 3 years to write the book, and I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Let's talk about this, because now we can say it's a success, and we'll talk about the success a little bit later, because congratulations, by the way. Some of that is incredible. We'll talk. But the journey of The Martian didn't go from Earth to Mars. It went through a bunch of publishers who said, no, this is not going to work.
Well, no, that didn't happen. That's somehow that got out there, that I got rejected by a bunch of publishers, but actually no publisher ever rejected The Martian. They came to me. So, yeah. So do you want me to go through the sequence of?
Yes, please. Let's wait. Hold on. We're going to put a title break right here. This is the real story, because everyone has been told that nobody wanted your book and they thought it was garbage, and then you self-published it. Tell us how it actually happened.
Okay. Well, first off, you should know that in my late 20s, I took a stab at being a full-time author. I mentioned this earlier in the show. And I spent 3 years trying to get a book published, but not The Martian, a different one called Theft of Pride. And it wasn't that good, and I couldn't get an agent and couldn't get a publisher interested. So after 3 years, I finally went back to working as a computer programmer and decided I'd be writing as a hobby from now on. But I never had to second guess and say, like, well, what if I, tried? Now I know, right? So then in 2009, I started writing The Martian. Now, this was after 10 years of writing various other things, webcomics, short stories, that sort of thing. And so this was just one of the many things that I was putting on my website. I wrote it in serial format, posting one chapter at a time. That helped a lot because I had accumulated over the previous 10 years about a couple, 2,000 to 3,000 regular readers who were just like, they'd signed up for my mailing list. Whenever I posted a new chapter or a new story, I would, send out an email, and they'd get the email, and then they'd know that there was something there for them to read. And so that was pretty cool because I tend to have a pretty nerdy group of readers, just like me. And that was handy because they would point out scientific inaccuracies and errors in the Martian. If anything that slipped through my own kind of like research, they would catch. So that helped the accuracy a lot. After I finished it, I thought I was just done. I was just posting it as a serial, and I moved on to other stories. And I got an email, or I got many emails from people saying, hey, I like this story. I like The Martian, but I don't like reading it in a web page. Can you make an e-reader format for me to download? So I figured out how to do that and posted an EPUB and a Mobi version of my site for people to download and said, okay, there you go. And then I got emails from other people who said, oh, hey, thanks for posting an e-reader format, but I'm not very technically savvy, and I don't know how to download a file from the internet and then put it onto my Kindle or Nook or anything. Can you just put it up on Kindle so that I can just push a button and get it? I'm like, okay, I figured out how to do that. And that's pretty easy. Anybody can do it, by the way. I highly recommend anyone out there who has dreams of writing a book and getting it out to readers. This is a great era to do it because you can just self-publish. You don't have to do any financial risk. You can just put it out there and take your chances, and there's no longer an old boy network between you and the readers. Anyway, so I posted it on Kindle and told everybody, okay, now you can read it in my website. You can download an e-reader version, or you can just download it with your Kindle. However, Amazon wouldn't let me charge less than 99 cents. That's the minimum you're allowed to charge, and they get 69 cents of that or something. And so because they're in this to make money, so they're not a charity, they're not a free cloud storage service. And so I said, all right, well, it costs you $1. If you download it yourself and put it on the thing yourself, you can have it for free. But if you buy it through Kindle, it'll cost you $1. So just think of that as you're paying Amazon $1 to put it on your Kindle for you. Anyway, far more people bought it through Amazon than downloaded it for free, which shows you kind of the reach that Amazon has into that market, right? So it started to work its way up into the top 10 lists. It started, it was like in the top 10 sci-fi, the top 10, they have a whole bunch of lists. And that started to increase sales even more, of course, because people are like, oh, I want a sci-fi. Let's see what the top sellers are. And that got the attention of Random House. And so they actually came to me, and an agent came to me. An agent came to me and said, like, hey, I think I can get this published. You want an agent? I'm like, after 3 years of failing to get an agent and trying over and over again, one comes to me. I'm like, sure. And then Random House approached us and said, we want to make a print edition. And that same week, 20th Century Fox approached us and said they wanted to buy the film rights. So it's just like all my dreams came true, just like all at once. And I mean, it's reasonable to be mad at me for this, but I did nothing. I did not market the book. I didn't send it to publishers or agents or film agents or anything. I was just sitting around and everything came to me. So
I don't think it's reasonable to be mad at you at all. I think you were very smart. But it's weird because it sounds like it kind of germinated for a couple of years, just picking up interest as you went along, and then it all happened so quickly. I had not heard that part of the story.
It took me 3 years to write. And then once it got onto Kindle and started taking off after that, that's where everything happened very quickly.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the movie, because the chat room is lighting up about the movie. And yes, the movie was greenlit. Here's the information I have. Please don't say anything that you're not allowed to say. I know that they've picked up Ridley Scott as the director. I know that they've got Matt Damon, who will be starring as Mark Watney. I know that it's scheduled for release in November 2015. And I know that I will be one of the first people in line. That's everything that I know. What else can you fill in that our audience may be interested about for the movie adaptation?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, I've seen the screenplay. It's written by Drew Goddard, who wrote, he directed Cabin in the Woods. He wrote Cloverfield and a bunch of episodes of Lost and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He played the important role of fake Thomas Jefferson in Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog.
Okay. Instant love.
Instant love. Yeah. He wrote a great screenplay, a great adaptation. I mean, if you were to make a screenplay that had everything that happened in the book, then your movie'd be 6 hours long, right? So he did a really good job picking what stays and what goes, and I think he did a really good job, and it follows the book well. So I'm very happy about that. Let's see what else. Okay, so they're filming now. Like literally, they have already shot a bunch of the movie and they're shooting now, and they're in Budapest. They're doing the studio work in Budapest, and that's for tax reasons. And also, Budapest has this really awesome studio that Ridley Scott liked a lot. It's this huge sound stage that's really convenient for the giant sets that he likes to have them build.
I take it that's probably where the hab is going to be. They're going to do the hab in studio.
Yeah, well, all the sets.
All the sets. Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
the hab, the probably some of the NASA interiors, I'm guessing. Although I know some of them are being shot on location in Budapest office buildings and stuff. That's where the Hermes will be. All the interiors for the Hermes.
Wow.
The Mars stuff, the exteriors on Mars, they're going to be shooting in Jordan, in a region called Wadi Rum, Jordan. So that kind of looks Marsy, and I imagine they'll do that in a bunch of post-production. Also,
thinking about it, you kind of need a desert that's kind of rusting, that's a little bit old, that you can color correct properly, but you don't want it too sandy. It's got to be a little bit rocky. So I can see why those locations would work.
Yeah, Jordan, yeah.
Yeah.
And then let's see, a bunch of performers that are in it. So as you know, Ridley Scott's directing. Matt Damon is playing Mark Watney. Commander Lewis is, let's see, so going through the kind of crew of Hermes, Commander Lewis is Jessica Chastain. Beck is Sebastian Stan, the Winter Soldier, Sebastian Stan. Johansson is Kate Mara, who you may know from House of Cards. She was the reporter. I don't know if you saw House of Cards.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. And let's see. Axel Henn is, I think he's a Norwegian actor, and he's going to be playing Fogel, who is the German character.
Perfect.
Who am I missing on the crew? Martinez, Michael Pena as Martinez.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yep. And then the NASA people we have Venkat Kapoor is being played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's 12 Years a Slave.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Nominated for Best Actor. Casting. Yep. Also, the people who are more my crowd would recognize him as the bad guy in Serenity, the movie.
Of course, yeah.
Sean Bean is the flight director, Mitch Henderson.
Nice.
Who's
Annie?
Annie Montrose is Kristen Wiig.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
Bridesmaids. Yeah.
Wow, this is an ensemble cast. You've got
it's
some
great.
firepower on there.
Also, I'm excited. I'm really excited. Donald Glover, who is I love the guy. From Community. He played Troy on Community. Anyway, he's playing one of the NASA scientists, and I'm stoked by that because I love that guy. And then I know I'm missing somebody. Oh, yeah, no.
Oh, who's Rich Parnell? You need a Rich Parnell.
Oh, that's Donald Glover.
Oh, that's Donald. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So the absent-minded genius kind of guy is
the steely-eyed missile man.
Steely-eyed missile man.
Absolutely. Yes. You know the fun thing about this is to think about the interplay that you had, because you've already said that you like the screenplay. So
I'm sorry, great. I forgot. I forgot. Jeff Daniels as Teddy, the head of NASA.
As who?
Teddy Sanders, the head of NASA.
Of course, yeah, you have to have Teddy.
NASA.
Yeah. Who's the JPL? Who do you have for the JPL guy?
Bruce Ing.
Yes.
I don't remember who plays him. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Sorry.
By the way, I have to say that audiobook, that was superbly done. So it really did bring out the story.
So that voice actor is named R.C. Bray is his name, or Bob Bray, but I think his professional name is R.C. Bray, and he did just a fantastic job. And I hear that over and over. By the way, every time someone tells me, "Oh, I heard the audiobook. That was so good. The narrator was so awesome." Yep. Well, yeah, he is.
Well, I mean, the thing about that was because of the way that you wrote Watney, and he has such a cutting wit. You could read it wrong. You could really read it wrong. And he did it. He got in the character. He's like, okay, this character is a smart ass. He's intelligent, but he's humble. He can make fun of himself. And that all came through in the voices. That's one of the things I really like. Because I read the book first, and then I listened to the audiobook, and I said, that's actually how I saw it. In my mind, that's the kind of character I saw Mark Watney as. So
yeah, he did a great job with the reading. Yeah.
When they were writing the screenplay, how much interplay was there? Because, of course, this is your baby, and I hear from authors every once in a while when it goes to a screenwriter and they realize not everything from the book is going to make it into the screenplay. It just can't. You can't be that long. And I hear angst of, that's a great scene. You can't remove. That's key to the story. How could did you have any of those moments?
Here and there, but really they were minor things. And I always ended up, looking at it's usually not like that's a critical scene or, oh, this will completely ruin things. It's like, usually it's more like, oh, I love that joke, but there's no way to work that joke in without working all this other crap in that would just bog down the movie. So I see why it's gone, but but also just as the novelist, my job on the movie is just to cash the check. Like I have no authority over anything. So Drew occasionally calls me and says like, oh, could you check the math on this thing and make sure that this thing, I did kind of a technical review of the screenplay to say like, oh, these are the things that are inaccurate or, and we did talk creatively a little bit, but no one is under any obligation to listen to anything I say. So yeah, the movie people make the movie.
Let's talk a little bit about that scientific checking, because again, this is one of the things that just really made you top of my hard sci-fi list, because there's soft sci-fi, there's things like Star Wars and just fantasy sci-fi, but whenever someone takes the care to actually go through the technology and explain how things work, so that I can say, oh yeah, that's not magic, it's not a black box, that's how it would actually work. You had to learn a bunch of stuff. You had to become a chemist to know how hydrazine works. You had to become a biologist to understand how the body works and how many calories you're going to need. You needed to become a botanist to understand how the plants were going to grow on a different planet. You had to become an orbital dynamicist in order to understand, well, oh yeah, that's how long it would actually take you. Actually, I think that was the number one thing that I loved about the book was you got the travel times right. So many times I read these books where they make a ship that can get to Mars in a month, and I'm thinking, that's not going to happen. You actually... I read this somewhere. You actually wrote a program to calculate the orbital trajectories of Earth and Mars so that you could get it right in the book.
Yeah. So I wrote software. So Hermes is not a point thrust acceleration craft. So it doesn't just thrust at Earth and then thrust at Mars to fall into Martian orbit. It is a constant thrust craft. It's powered by an ion engine, which means it gets a small amount of thrust constantly. And so that is a real pain to try to do any calculations on. The only way I could figure out how to do it is with simulation. So I wrote software to show the orbits of Earth and Mars and then make this Hermes, and I could adjust its course and heading and power levels and stuff like that so that it would, go from Earth and then smoothly intersect Mars. And ended up taking 124 days with a ship that can accelerate constantly at 2 millimeters per second, which for reference is, in terms of acceleration, is 2/10,000ths the acceleration due to gravity. Like if you drop something, that's 2/10,000ths of that, 1/5000th of what gravity would do.
But it's all physics. It's all physics. Yep. Tiny thrust, but for a very long time, and you can get moving.
You can get moving. And so the cool thing about that was, okay, so I calculated their trajectories, and then I'm like, but the positions of Earth and Mars matter, right? Because they're both on orbits that different eccentricities, but they're both largely circular orbits around the sun, but they're in different locations, in those orbits. And I realized I had to find a launch window. To make this work, I needed to actually pick a launch date and a good launch window to get them from Earth to Mars. And also I had to have their original, for reasons that are clear if you read the book, but will sound baffling to people who haven't yet. I had to have the original mission plan overlap Thanksgiving. So that was another thing that I had to account for on the launch window, right, in order for the book to work. And I did all that, and I found the launch window, and I got it all worked out. So what's funny is I can actually, every single day in that book, which is rigidly defined by, this is Sol 268 or whatever, I could tell you the real world date exactly to the day that it is.
Right.
But I didn't, because I didn't want to mention dates or anything like that, because I don't want the book to be dated once those dates pass. But I may have a contest someday. So there's a lot of communication between Earth and Mars in the story, and there's the transmission time of getting light from Earth to Mars or vice versa. So it takes at the shortest, I think it's 4 or 5 minutes. And at the longest, when Earth and Mars are as far apart as they can be, it can be up to 20 minutes. And so throughout the book, you'll see they have transmission latencies when talking to Mars or Earth or back and forth. Those transmission latencies are accurate to where Earth and Mars will be on the dates that those scenes are taking place.
Right.
So, yeah. I did a lot of work to try to be accurate.
and that was one of the things, because I actually geeked out, because I was trying to catch some inaccuracies in your book, and I actually did.
There are a few.
I went chapter by chapter, and I was like, I'm almost positive he screwed up the orbital dynamics here. And I was looking at, okay, so if it's this amount of transmission time this day, it means that they're this far from Earth. And then I mapped out, and I got to the end of the book. I'm like, he got it right. I have to say, I was a little disappointed. I was like, I'm going to find something that no one else figured out. No, it was dead on.
There are some errors, though. So
do you want to share any?
Yeah, I can. So first off, the biggest one is a deliberate concession that I made. I just said, yes, this is inaccurate to physics, but I'm doing it anyway. And it's right there in the first scene, the sandstorm that causes all the problems. In real life, a sandstorm on Mars would not cause that kind of problem. While it's 175 kilometer an hour winds are fairly common in Martian dust storms, sandstorms, Mars's atmosphere is less than 1% the density of Earth's. So the inertia of the storm hitting you, the winds, the force of the wind would be, 1% of an equivalently velocity wind on Earth, which means your 175, kilometer per hour wind would feel like about a 1 kilometer an hour wind. It would be just like this really gentle breeze that would not do any damage at all.
But that would have been difficult to advance the plot on a 1 mile per hour wind.
I would have had to come up with some other way, and I did actually. I came up with a different way for him to be stranded. It was like they were going to be testing the MAV, and like a fuel tank explodes and causes all the problems, and then they have to launch right away because they're running out of fuel because it's leaking out, and so on. And I could have come up with something else that was physically accurate, but people have the concept in their minds of what a Martian dust storm is like, and I decided I'd take advantage of that. Besides, if you're going to have a man versus nature story, you may as well have nature strike the first blow.
Right.
Another one was a chemist emailed me and said, he said, you got everything right on the reduction of hydrazine. You got all the chemistry right. You did all that. But unfortunately, you revealed throughout the book the total volume of the HAB, or you at least revealed the measurements of the HAB from which I can calculate the volume, and the atmospheric makeup of the HAB, of what the air is inside and what its density is and everything. So he knew all the dynamics of the structure of the inside of the HAB. And then he said, you also told me how much hydrazine he reduced into hydrogen. And so from that, he could work out the total amount of heat released by that reduction in the time that the book says that he did it, and then apply that as energy to the atmosphere inside the HAB. And he said, like, that would have increased the HAB's temperature by 400 degrees Celsius. And I'm like,
you got me. You got me.
You got me. I didn't. If I'd known, I would have fixed it. If I'd known, actually, that would have been cool. I wish someone had told me that when I was still, before the book had gone to print, because I would have been able to add a new thing. He's like, oh, I've got to deal with heat. I gotta get rid of the heat. He could bring a boulder in or something like that through an airlock, because a boulder of rock can hold a huge amount of heat, and it would be really cold because it came from the surface of Mars. Or he could do it slowly over a few days, or he could work out some radiator system. It would have been cool. I would have had another challenge for him.
Well, you already had a mechanism built in. He could have disabled the heater on the atmospheric regulator, and it would have brought back supercooled gases into the HAB, and you would have been good to go.
Yep.
That's fantastic. oh. So just two though, right?
I thought there was at least some more. Some questionable. So okay, so here's the biggest concession. So everything in the book is technology that really exists right now. Like ion engines, that's not just something I made up. They exist. People have put up space probes that move around with ion engines. It's the oxygenator. You can make one of those. Like all this stuff exists. However, the HAB canvas and presumably everything else that they use, including their spacesuits, the rovers, and Hermes, seems to be impenetrable to radiation. And realistically, if you were outside of Earth's magnetosphere for long periods of time, you'd be getting a serious dose of radiation. And I mentioned this, I just do one hand wavy paragraph that says like, oh, this material in the HAB canvas is radiation proof, which means you can't broadcast radio through it either, whatever. But that there is no such material. There's nothing that's like a millimeter thick that could stop the ionizing radiation from the sun at Mars's radius. So it doesn't exist.
I was actually running that through my head. I was like, okay, so some sort of like copper titanium mesh that's really I'm like, I don't know if you could do that.
There's nothing.
Okay, so there's a little bit of magic. We've got magic canvas, which by the way, that canvas was used for everything. If you haven't read the book, go read it.
Yeah. It was really handy, the HAB canvas.
Of course it was a HAB canvas. It was a rope. It was a bedroom. It was a sling. It was part of a spaceship. So it really did everything in the book.
It didn't really do its job when they tried to make it part of a spaceship.
Actually, that's one of my favorite scenes. I'm not going to spoil it too much, but when they're talking about what they have to do to the MAV to get him back up so he can make the intercept with Hermes, and he says, "You're sending me to space in a convertible."
Yep.
It was fantastic.
Not even a hard top.
Not even a hard top. Andrew, Andy, unfortunately, we've reached the end of the hour here for Padres Corner, but I want to thank you so very much for being on. I've had so much fun talking about this book. I know you've got a second book out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Not out. I mean, I'm working on it.
Working
now.
on it,
I'm
yes.
writing now. Yeah. So yeah, I'm working on it. It's less, and this makes me nervous. It's remember when I wrote The Martian, I didn't expect it to have like this huge audience. I still don't really know what I did right, and I'm trying to warn people as best I can. The book I'm working on now is more traditional sci-fi. It's less rigidly technical and it's more soft. You know, there are aliens and stuff like that. So I'm like, I hope people aren't disappointed. I hope they like it.
Are you gonna go the Tom Clancy route and start building a universe? Well, we have the Andy Weir universe, and we'll have the hard science universe and the soft science universe.
Well, this book certainly is in a different universe than The Martian. The next book it's tentatively titled Zhek, Zhek, and that'll be its own, setting.
Oh, when do we get to start seeing it?
It should be out late next year or early 2016.
Fantastic. And of course, probably you're not going to have difficulty getting any sort of publisher. They're going to be lining about your door for this.
I've already got a contract. Yeah, I'm writing it for Random House. I've got a deadline. So
fantastic. Andy, is there anything else that you want to tell our audience before what we call an end to the show? Because of course they got to go buy your book. So right now, if they haven't already, go to Amazon, go to Audible, buy a copy of the book, buy the audiobook, buy both. I guarantee you're going to like it. If you're watching this channel right now, if you like technology and even the least bit, you're going to find this book fascinating. And just go to the end and then listen to it again because it's fantastic. Until next time, thank you so very much for being on Padres Corner.
Thank you.
Folks, I want to thank you for everything this year. This has been a phenomenal year. 2014 has been packed full of surprises and graces and just an awful lot of fun. A lot of opportunities for me to create content, and that's what my stay here at Twit TV has been all about. More than that, I want to thank you for making Padres Corner a place where we can just geek out. It doesn't have a theme. It's not like the other Twitch shows where we're locked into one area of technology or another. It's a show for geeks by a geek who loves geeks. Now, we've got plenty more coming for you in 2015, so stay tabbed because Padres Corner is going to get bigger. In fact, I believe we're going to be moving to a different schedule in order to accommodate the people who say that Tuesday's just not a good day for us. But until then, here are a couple of helpful words for everyone who wants to know what I'm doing. First, you're going to want to drop by our show notes page. Don't forget to go to twit.tv/Padre. There you'll find not just all of our episodes, but also the place where you can automatically get our shows into your device of choice each and every single week. Don't forget that you can find me all over the Twit TV schedule. On Mondays, you'll find me for This Week in Enterprise Tech at 2:30 Pacific Time, where I'll talk about data centers, which is pretty much anything that connects anything to anything around the world. On Tuesdays, at least for now, you'll find me for Padres Corner at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time. And on Thursdays, you'll catch me twice, once at 11 o'clock for Know How with Brian Burnett, where I get to go over some of the projects that I've been geeking out to so you can go home and be a weekend geek warrior. And at 1:30, it's Coding 101 if you want to get your code on. Don't forget that if you want to know what I've been doing each and every single week, probably the best place to find me is on my Twitter page. Just go to twitter.com/PadreSJ. There you'll find what I'm doing in every episode that I do here on the Twit TV network, as well as keep up with, the things I do when I'm not here on Twit TV. Again, I want to thank you very much for everything you've done for me, for my family, for our family here at Twit TV, and give a special shout out to all those who make this show possible. That's Lisa and Leo for letting me do the show. That's for Brian Burnett for being my co-host, my TD for so many of my endeavors, and of course, to you. To you, I say thank you, good night, and geek out.